clock says 6 o'clock. So we'd like to welcome you out to this evening's Planning Commission meeting for Wednesday, May 2nd. It doesn't quite feel like May quite yet. It's a little chilly out there still, but we're grateful to have you here. We'd like to start by having the Pledge of Allegiance. We are actually going to do something a little bit different maybe tonight. Richard Davis, who's on our Planning Commission, you may or may not be aware that today is Kipling Davis Day. His daughter went missing 22 years ago today. So we excuse him to be at a candlelight vigil for him, for her. And after we do the Pledge of Allegiance, if we could just take a moment of silence. Stay standing if you would. If you can, if you can't stay standing, go ahead and sit down. But and then we'll proceed with the meeting. So, Tracy, would you lead us to the pledge, please?
Please repeat the pledge with me.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. All right, our first item on our agenda tonight is the Steve Johnson annexation. Mr. Anderson, if you'll help us out with that one.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. The subject property for this annexation is on the north end of Spanish Fork, just east of State Road 51. It's adjacent to property that's been approved as part of the Meadow Creek Ridge Townhome Development, which is located right here. The property was recently included in the city's annexation policy plan when we amended that just a couple of months ago. It was really serendipitous that we received this annexation proposal, and in fact the next one was kind of in the same boat on part of it. Each of which had some property that was outside of our annexation policy. So as we updated that for some other reasons, this property was included in that policy. And at this point, we've been through the protest period. We did not receive any protests. We have a public hearing scheduled with the City Council 2 weeks from last night on May 15th. And we've had no concerns at all with having this property annexed into Spanish Fork. This property, I think, still is and has been also included in Springville's annexation policy. And because of that, we've worked to make sure that the applicants have corresponded with Springville. We don't have any interest at all in, maybe to put it one way, stepping on Springville's toes and annexing land that's in their annexation policy. In this particular case, this property is situated such that it's really easy for us to serve with utilities. In fact, this is proposed to be annexed into Spanish Fork so that the Meadow Creek Ridge Townhome project that has been approved but not yet built, in fact, construction hasn't started on it yet, could be expanded to include this property and some land that's already in Springville right here, which is a separate issue, but because of that, I think Springville's been particularly cooperative, understanding that Spanish Fork City can serve it. Springville likely would not be able to do so for a very long time. And as I understand it, they're comfortable with this property now being annexed into Spanish Fork. So tonight we would request that the Planning Commission make a recommendation on the annexation and zoning that would be assigned at the time of annexation. Staff's recommending that the annexation be approved and that the zoning be rural residential at the time of annexation, with the understanding that the applicants then would submit a zone change application that would be accompanied by an amended preliminary plat for the townhome project here that includes that area, so that, as is customary, the actual zoning would not be assigned until you have a bona fide development proposal in front of you.
So the triangle piece that's in Springville, how does that work?
So, as I understand it, the easiest way to adjust a boundary between two municipalities is a boundary adjustment. That's the formal title for a process that both of the cities would work on to change the existing boundary between the two cities so that that would come into Spanish Fork.
So in essence, it's just currently just a gap between the two cities? Is that how I would understand it?
Right now, isn't this in Spanish Fork?
No, right now, if you can see this kind of heavy dashed line here, right now that is the current Spanish Fork city boundary.
Not Spanish Fork, but it looks like if you look at the county property lines, this split continues all the way up to here. And so I don't know
There we
what
go.
this piece is. Is that part of Springville's or Spanish Fork's? Obviously, they're in neither right now.
As I understand it, this is the current city boundary for Springville, right there.
There's your boundary right there. So that line is Springville.
If we have
So,
adjacent
which means-
municipalities.
Which means that piece right there is in county.
Correct.
Never seen one, do we?
So likelihood when this gets annexed, this would come all the way down there and be part of Springville's. Okay. Makes sense.
Ultimately, the idea is that the city boundary would follow that property line right there.
Right now, the Springville boundary shows it going straight across
That sounds
There.
right to me.
based on the county map. So that little piece would be all that's left, at least that side of the railroad tracks, within the county.
Got it?
So what you're saying is that just happens administratively between the two municipalities to correct that.
It takes action on the part of both city councils, but yes, it happens at that level, just with each of their consent.
Any other questions for staff? It's not listed as a public hearing, should it be?
We don't have a public hearing on annexations with the planning commission, we do with the city council.
Okay, that's, after 6 years, you'd like to think I'd know that, but guess not. So, questions, comments? Not, I'd entertain a motion regarding the Steve Johnson annexation. And this is a recommendation to the city council.
Yes.
I'll make a motion that we approve the recommendation for the Johnson annexation.
Second?
Got a motion from Commissioner Tagg and a second from Commissioner Euler. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Moral annexation is our next item.
Again, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Staff's recommendation on this proposal is similar to the last. We recommend that the property be annexed and that rural residential zoning be assigned at the time of annexation.
Can I stop you there?
Yeah.
In our motion, we did not mention the rural residential zoning. Should we amend that for that reason?
I missed that then. We'd appreciate your recommendation on the zoning as well, so.
Oh, do you want to, sorry about that.
And you can make a separate motion, even to that effect, relative to the zoning, if you'd like.
So we're changing the zoning? Oh, wait.
So the zoning has to be assigned to it once it gets annexed into
Okay.
the city. And the recommendation for staff is that it stays rural residential until the plat gets submitted for our approval.
Okay, so I will make another proposal that the annexation of the Steve Johnson property be assigned rural residential.
Second.
Okay. Motion by Commissioner Tagg, second by Commissioner Euler. Any other conversation, question? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, sorry about that. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you. It's a good catch. Again, this proposal comes with staff's recommendation to approve the annexation and to have rural residential zoning assigned at the time of annexation. The majority of this property has been included in Spanish Fork's annexation policy for a number of years, but there was a small part that had been left out, an area created because previously we had used a ditch in this area as the anticipated city boundary. However, now with the construction of Woodland Hills Drive, it seems to make much more sense that that be the boundary. So That little area was recently included in our annexation policy plan, as I mentioned a moment ago, when that was updated here just a few months ago. With that being the case, the land's in the city's annexation policy. We do anticipate having some non-residential zoning assigned at the intersection of Woodland Hills Drive and I'm going to say Main Street, our Main Street on the south end, to accommodate some kind of non-residential use. I think the applicants are comfortable with that. But given activity and development that is proposed and planned for the area, particularly the development of the Sunrock property, utilities continuously, therefore, would get a little bit closer to this property, making it more feasible for development to occur. I think for that reason, largely, we as staff have felt like this is a very appropriate time to recommend that the annexation be approved. I don't believe that the petitioners have any immediate plans to develop, but feel like having the property annexed sort of makes it a little bit easier for them to start to plan for the future use of the property. And I certainly concur with that. I think it is an appropriate step, like I mentioned before. We've been through the protest period on this proposed annexation. We haven't had any protests. And like the Steve Johnson annexation, we do have a public hearing scheduled with the city council for May 15 to consider this proposal.
So Dave, I've got a question with this one. So staff recommendation for this is that it be annexed with rural residential, but in the general plan it's listed as commercial. Why don't we just at this point annex it as commercial if that's what's in the general plan?
That's a great question, and frankly, I think we could. I think the only thing that makes me feel like maybe it's more appropriate to just go rural residential, which effectively we use the rural residential zone. We heard this phrase sometimes as kind of a holding zone, where properties really don't have much development potential when they're zoned rural residential. So it sort of gives us an opportunity to sort things out.
Options down the road.
Keep all the options open is maybe how I'd say it. I don't think we could probably predict very accurately right now what the actual boundary of a commercial zone on the corner should be. That's probably something that we'll only be able to do with much accuracy when we have an actual development plan in front of us, and we can work off of that. But that's probably the only reason that we'd say now to do the rural residential zone and to entertain some different proposal in the future. The general plan still, from our perspective, absolutely would serve as the model and the guide that we would expect somebody to follow if a proposed zone change, is presented to the city, and would expect again that you would have some kind of non-residential development on the corner. But that all being said, if you feel like it's better to talk about some commercial zoning on the corner now, we've had that discussion with the applicants, and I think that is part of their long-term plan for the property. One advantage to having commercial zoning assigned now is that it does make it harder for somebody to go a different direction in the future. So I think that is a concept that we're pretty committed to, feeling like that's a pretty viable corner, and those are somewhat hard to come by for different retail uses. So we certainly would want to make sure that we're taking advantage of that opportunity. So that might be a good reason to go ahead and talk about having commercial zoning assigned there, even if that means that we need to adjust the boundary a little bit in the future on that zoning.
Could we look at the general plan, overlay on that, just to kind of see how much, it's probably just a little radius there, isn't it, Dave?
It is, and
Intersection?
you guys understand that we're making our guesses at this level pretty broadly. It's something that's more refined than a wild guess,
Yeah, that's
but
pretty big chunk.
Still
Yeah.
covers
in all honesty,
quite a bit of that property.
I really don't foresee that much of that property developing commercially. And I say that in part based on the discussions that we had with Steve Boulder, for example, as we were reviewing the Sunrock proposal, and where we should and maybe don't need to plan for commercial development along Arrowhead Trail. This is also an area that he looked at, and we talked about perhaps scaling back our commercial plans for this area, and consciously opted not to, just because it's typically a little bit easier to scale that back when we have a development proposal in front of us than it is to add to something at that point in time. So we felt like this was the most conservative approach to take at that general plan level, whatever it was, 6 or 7 months ago when we had that discussion. But certainly, I think we would expect at least, well, it'd probably be very similar to what we required Sunrock
Yeah.
to preserve for commercial uses. I want to say about 2 acres right on the corner, 200 feet minimum depth on at least one of the sides to make it functional.
Does Salem have similar general plan designation for the south side of Woodland Hills Drive?
That's a good question. I don't know.
Jason, do you know?
Don't,
Okay, thought I'd try.
I think we might be able to dig that up pretty quickly, though. Take a peek.
I wonder if it makes sense to do it similar to that Sunrock, to preserve that corner. It's gonna be harder for someone to change it later if we don't do it now. Right?
I think it's going to be harder for somebody to do residential development on the corner if you assign commercial zoning now.
Yeah.
So if that's our goal, then that
It is shown
Worth
that way
considering.
in Salem,
Salem, commercial on the south side.
all the way down to 1200 north. So,
It'd be beneficial if that entire property did eventually develop commercially, right? Realistically, it may not happen, but would be nice if it did.
We're pretty jealous, particularly when it comes to retail development, about properties that can support that, because they're few and far between, and that's how ultimately we pay the bills as a municipality. So, yeah, from one perspective, it would be very beneficial if you could have a grocery store there, for example, maybe 50 or 60,000 square feet of retail space. And that's kind of the question, could that corner support that kind of activity, particularly with the things that are planned out closer to I-15 with Arrowhead Trail? It might be anybody's guess. We've tried to make educated guesses and to use educated people as a resource for that. And I think it's interesting that even they acknowledge that it's really hard to predict exactly what
this could be 20 years down the road before,
Yeah.
and frankly, I think that's probably what
at least.
the right kind of time frame to think about.
Is Main Street being widened all the way down to Woodland Hills Drive?
I think this summer that's happening. I don't know if you know any more about it.
Any other questions for staff? Excuse me.
I don't see the applicants here tonight. They might have feelings about the zoning as well, but
And that can be for us, it would be a recommendation to the city council,
Right.
which would then probably prompt them to attend the public hearing in 2 weeks to confirm or deny their willingness to.
we'd strongly suggest that they attend that meeting, make sure they.
Feelings one way or the other?
Yeah, I feel like we ought to reserve that corner piece of it. I don't know exactly what the description might be, but maybe we could leave that up to the city council to,
But we'd make a recommendation for a certain type of zoning, right? A C2. I don't know if that's the right
is that the
zone.
what you'd can,
That'd be the ideal for the city because that really promotes retail kind of development.
What kind of things can go in a C2?
Really any kind of commerce activity that you can imagine. So personal service businesses, nail salons, and that sort of a thing. Walmart, Costco, on kind of the other end of the scale in terms of size and everything in between, fast food restaurants. Frankly,
If you would've said
7-Eleven,
Target,
Maverick,
then you would've sold the
different
community
things
on it.
like that. Which I would guess you probably would see a convenience store or something like that here on this corner. Maybe something else.
Do you recall at the UTA meeting, UDOT, did this road come up at all as far as their plans on trying to get people, because the growth down here and Salem and Woodland Hills and that whole area. Right now, they're all coming up Woodland Hills Drive, and it seems like for the most part, they go up North. But if this road gets widened and access to I-15 increases, I can see this piece of property with a widened road very good for.
As traffic conditions get worse on Main Street north of that intersection, that's when people just, is it better off for me to get northbound on I-15 by going west at this point? And our experience certainly suggests that there's some of those commuters that through traffic that are going to increasingly make that decision at which we know will happen as the traffic volume on Main Street increases. I think it's a little bit hard to predict exactly how much of a shift. I know already today people make that decision and go west at that point, and I agree that Mr. Boulder emphasized, again, we were talking more about the Arrowhead Trail corridor, want to be at three-way intersections. They have to be at some kind of an intersection, typically to feel like there's the sort of viability that would support a development here. They really want to be at intersections that have four-way traffic, so they're catching people coming from all different directions, and this intersection certainly has that characteristic.
The other thing, when we talked about the Sunrock development, did we discuss an outlet road from the south end of that development that would tie into Woodland Hills Drive?
The topography is really tricky there to make that connection, so I think we have something, but it's not a real significant.
Map shows an outlet on the south end of that. I think, but
Sunrock project.
Yeah, but it ends at this subject
So
property.
until this develops, that won't go anywhere. We certainly would expect that connection to be made down to Woodland Hills Drive when development occurs here. But we don't anticipate that being, the main direction, I guess, that traffic's going to travel.
But that being said, with all of the residential going in here, with this huge neighborhood that's going up here, you got residential possibility here. My opinion is that we recommend right now that that be zoned commercial too.
All of it?
All of it.
That's pretty much that general zone.
General plan does kind of,
It kind of matches the annexation boundary. 26 acres, that's a third of Canyon Creek, to put that in perspective. So it's, you'd be able to support a full-size grocery store, 120,000 square feet plus, with an area of that type. I say that just kind of maybe put things in perspective, not to persuade you otherwise. And frankly, I'd say unabashedly go for it, except that I think there's a greater likelihood that we'll see big grocery stores and bigger boxes a couple of miles further to the west, closer to the interchange. But that would certainly give the city council something to think about, and the property owners and us as staff for the next couple of weeks if you guys made that recommendation.
do we suggest half? Maybe that's a better, more appropriate.
We could
What would the other
verbalize
half
it
be,
to let
rural
them.
I think
residential?
leave it rural residential to let it kind of, one of the things that I'm nervous about a little bit is just you've got the commercial there. I don't know what I'm thinking here. The grade differential's probably fine.
You mean with commercial right next to that residential?
Yeah, but I've seen that all the time, and
But yeah, there's a pretty big drop. So besides commercial, residential homes is what logically would make sense going in there as well?
mixed use thing.
Mixed use?
We haven't necessarily planned for mixed use, but this corner has the same characteristics as other corners in town have that we've designated for some kind of mixed use development, maybe a little bit higher density residential with retail and that kind of a thing. I think that also makes,
How often does the general plan get updated?
we're required to do it every 6 or 7 years. And that's kind of been the schedule that we've been on, maybe a little bit more frequently than that.
So, with your expertise in the future, if this were to be re-looked at, would you put in the general plan mixed use, or would you leave that commercial?
I think we want to see non-residential development right at the corner. So if I were to suggest a change right now to maybe consider mixed use, it would be mixed use flanking some kind of commercial development right at the corner. I don't think we'd want to see, for example, a townhome development right at the corner or something else that we might consider approving in a mixed use designation. I think instead we want that to be commercial. So I think it's viable. It could happen.
No more questions. I'm done. Sorry.
Don't apologize. I like the questions. I don't have any questions. Somebody want to make a motion?
I'll make a motion. I'll make a motion that we recommend to the city council to approve the moral annexation to rural residential zoning, but we leave a corner there at the intersection for C2 commercial, and maybe let the city council make that definition.
Talk about size. Okay.
I second that.
Okay, I've got a motion by Commissioner Tanner and a second by Commissioner Euler. Any other conversation or questions? Got that motion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that motion carries. Excuse me. The frog's gonna jump in my throat here eventually tonight, so. All right, the next item on our agenda is the Evans General Plan Amendment. This is a public notice or a public hearing, so. Is there a difference between public notice and public hearing?
We provide public notice for public hearing.
It's just listed as public notice on the agenda and not public hearing on a
We
later.
meant public hearing.
Okay.
More than anything, I really want to get the planning commission's thoughts simply on the idea in an area where we have said we think the market can support and we think that it's appropriate to plan for some larger lots for single-family detached homes. Particularly the idea that any lots be 15,000 square feet or larger. I'm talking about Leland, the area really at this point that's just west of the Old Mill Estates project and the development that's just north of that. With the last general plan update that we did, we created the estate density designation that again would require somebody to develop properties in the R115 zone or larger, so a third of an acre, half of an acre, or something like that. And do you mind going to maybe our just GIS to look at the map so we can take a look at this bigger area? With the general plan. So if you zoom out just a little bit there, thanks. So the colors are close to one another. I apologize, they're kind of hard maybe to distinguish, but for example, the Sunrock project right here, that was zoned R112 because the general plan designation for that property is low-density residential. And the R112 zone is consistent with that designation. The Old Mill Estates project and all of the land to the west of that, approaching the intersection around Revere Health and so forth, is designated for larger lots. We've talked about the need that we think we have in the community for lots that would accommodate, more easily at least 3- and 4-car garages and that kind of a thing, lots with more width. And this is one of 2 areas in the city where we literally drew that into the plan. That being said, this is the subject property that we're talking about tonight, right here. And simply put, they'd rather do R112 zoning, so a little bit more dense. I don't think the density is dramatically greater than what you could do with R115 zoning. As you can see, their lots with the concept plan that they provided, you know, some of them are well over 15,000 square feet. Some of them are closer to 10,000 square feet. But the only reason that I'd bring this, even for you to consider, is just kind of the idea that we know Arrowhead Trail is going to just get bigger and bigger and busier. And sometimes we plan for a little bit of separation between a big road like that and neighborhoods that have the biggest lots in the city in them. So I guess really I'd ask how you feel about potentially amending the general plan so that not only on this property, Mike, if you don't mind going back to the general plan, but for, you know, maybe a corridor along Arrowhead Trail, we should do something like what we did along this road here, where there is, you could call it a separation. A lot of times we use the word buffer, but something in there where this would be a little bit higher density than what's planned for the projects we're reviewing to the north. And that's it.
That you just pointed to, the yellowish color, is that medium?
This is medium, so I'd suggest instead of medium along here, it be low. So it match what we've seen with Sunrock and what we have designated for some properties to the south.
Would that be part of this recommendation?
You know, I don't think that we even made a strong recommendation on this. We're really more than anything looking to get your thoughts and ideas.
Okay.
And I think certainly if you were to say tonight that it's most appropriate to leave the general plan as it is, that's very, very easy for us to support. But you know, at the same time, particularly in light of this request that we had, which really is a request for a zone change, and we as staff did say timeout. You know, I think we really feel like instead this is a general plan kind of discussion, and that's the spirit, I guess, in which we're bringing it to you tonight, to get your thoughts sort of at that broader level, rather than to talk about the concept plan and how streets need to be designed and that sort of thing.
So my only thoughts with this, Dave, are in the city, currently, we've only got about 4 or 5% of the residential district that's R115. And we've got 32% that's R112. I don't think, and this is my own personal opinion, other people, when it comes to density and whatnot, may view things differently than I do, but I don't think the city has enough areas designated R115 for larger properties.
That's kind of been the general consensus of past planning commissions as we've talked.
So I would have a hard time
Scaling it back.
without designating other areas to replace it. That would need to happen first, in my opinion.
Dave, what are the lot sizes for those that are established? I mean, that's shown in the R115 or the estate density. Would that fit?
It's 15,000 square feet.
Okay.
There.
But it ends, that's the last. Okay, other comments, questions for staff?
I'm in favor of keeping it the same as it is.
What it is?
Yeah, I don't think that we should change. I think we talked a lot about traveling to find places where you could put the estate density type of places, and it is hard to find them in the city, and I know that has been a huge concern since I've been on the planning commission, and to just, the changes that were made, I think were well thought out, to make that R115, so I think it should just be as it is. And
Can we zoom out and see citywide where we've kind of got the R115?
It's here, and it's over on the bench here. So you remember Vincent Ridge Estates? It's a project that you approved just a couple of years ago. It's well under construction now. It was one of the first projects over here where we kind of said time out. You know, we're gonna require things to step up from R112, so that's zoned R115. And the properties that are to the to the east of that, they haven't been zoned R115 yet, but we would, I think, only recommend that zoning be changed to R115 for that area. And then we have this area here, south of the Maple Mountain Estates project that I think is under construction here, kind of to the south and east of Maple Mountain High School. That whole area over there would fit into the same category, so we would expect to see bigger lots for single-family homes there as well. So it's really those three areas right now. And I guess also, I don't often think about this, but on the other side of the river bottoms, which in all candor won't develop for a really long time, I would guess, but kind of, it's the same designation over there.
Okay, and this is a public hearing, so I'd entertain a motion to move into public hearing.
So moved.
Motion from Commissioner Tagg. Do I have a second?
Second?
Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, this is the opportunity for you in the public. Thank you for coming tonight. If you would like to make a comment with regards to the proposed general plan amendment, maybe it might take a second just to maybe do a little history or understand education, probably a better way to put it. Our general plan is, as Mr. Anderson indicated, modified every 5 to 7 years. And it's the guiding document that the city has established for the vision for the city. When a developer wants to come in and develop that, us as a planning commission turn to that general plan document to say, okay, what is the past vision, what's been established? And it's intended to look out, 10, 15, 20, 30 years?
40 or 50.
Okay, 40 or 50.
Cities build out. That's what we
Okay. Okay. And so that's the purpose of a general plan designation. It doesn't tell a landowner necessarily what they can and can't do, kind of does, but it doesn't totally, because there can be a variety of zoning oftentimes within a particular general plan designation. So anyway, I don't know if that explains it well enough. You dealt with this a lot longer than I have. So if you have a comment, if you'll please come forward, use the microphone, and state your name for us. We will try and keep everything to about 3 minutes maximum on our comments, please.
My name's Dwayne Kerr, 1618 South Mill Road. I live somewhat kitty corner to Sean Evans's place. I'm neither for or against what Sean wants to do. I think a person should be entitled to do what they want with their own property to a point. My reason for getting up is that it just seems like Spanish Fort is bent on putting concrete and asphalt on every available piece of dirt there is. We live out there. We have unlimited animal rights. We've lived there for a long time. And the situation is I understand people need places to live, and I'm not against that at all. And it's a nice area. But the deal is you know, I raise beef. There's a lot of beef and animals being raised out there. And sometimes people are not familiar with agricultural smells. And you know, I'm afraid of a diminishment of animal rights. And I understand the Planning Commission doesn't have any purview on any of that, but it happens. And it just happened with the City Council a few months ago. They tried to slide in a diminishment of animal rights into another proposal. And if an alert individual hadn't have been made everybody aware of that, it would have passed. No doubt it would have passed. You know, and that just can't be that way. You know, those of us that are living there and that have existing rights should be able to be ensured that we continue to have that. That's all I have to say.
Great, thank you. Thank you. And I believe that's the case. Those for this particular piece of property, it won't impact your right to use that piece of property the way you currently do. Am I incorrect or correct in that?
You're correct.
Okay, Thank you.
Hi, Dennis McGraw, a little ways away from this property. I just make mention of, I don't have a problem with this zoning. I wouldn't mind even seeing it go to an R10. I think they just need to consider something as a council. This area is a pretty high water table, and to try to induce a very upper end ordinance type neighborhood with larger lots, it's really not gonna work well in that area, is my opinion. The benches make more sense to have that type of zoning. They encourage that type of building, maybe the higher end. And to make this bigger and reduce the lots that the seller can use and the expenses that it takes to develop the lot without a basement, no doubt, doesn't make a lot of sense to me to try to have a larger lot versus a smaller one, which would encourage more development, more building, rather than staying bigger that may stifle some of that.
Okay. Great considerations. Thank you, Mr. McGraw. It's been interesting to watch the Ivory development. That's just west of the high school, and to see that how much dirt they brought in for that very reason, so that they could have basements.
That's actually more a sewer issue.
It's a sewer issue. Really? Okay.
There's no doubt it drives that expense up.
Yeah, certainly. Certainly. Anybody else that would like to make a comment before the Planning Commission for this issue? Okay, seeing none, I'd entertain a motion to move out of public hearing.
Motion to move out of public hearing.
Do I have a second?
Second?
Thank you. Any other comments, questions for staff or amongst the Planning Commission?
I'd like to discuss a little bit the comment about the density and how a lower density may affect that area. I guess that it's only from a development standpoint that it would be more expensive to develop less lots. Wouldn't those lots bring a higher price as well to offset the extra cost of development with fewer lots in a development?
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
And so,
Makes more sense to me anyways.
yeah,
Fewer lots with the still expense higher, it's harder to develop and sell versus more lots. More margin, better margins, makes more sense. Drives more economic building, property taxes and so forth.
Is the applicant here tonight?
I don't believe so.
What was the question?
If
Yeah,
Mr. Evans is here tonight.
it seems to me that that the lots that are larger aren't having many problems in selling in other areas in our city and the surrounding cities. As a matter of fact, they seem to sell just as quickly as the smaller lots. And I don't know that just the financial viability of a developer is what we're interested here in. Is I believe that this area with the zoning that is there was designed to keep this at a little lower density with a higher level of home being built there. And I'm familiar with the property and the area, and you're right, there is a lot of water that is in the area, and that would have to be taken into consideration. I just don't know if 4 or 5 or even less, maybe only 3 or 4, would be that much of a detriment to a developer. Just wondering.
So I have a question. I don't know if we can pull up was it the general plan that showed the whole area? I mean, I think you bring up a really good point about the water table and what can be built in that area. And you mentioned, changing not just this little section, but considering changing the general plan for that whole section along the road there. I mean, I would feel more comfortable being able to maybe look into how popular are estates on land like that throughout the state, not just in Spanish Fork. And is it, the fact that it's on a busy road doesn't really concern me, because I've seen estates on busy roads and they're beautiful. So it doesn't bother me as much as maybe the water table, and are there pros and cons to where we're doing this estate idea compared to on the benches and stuff like that?
Can I share just a couple thoughts
Yeah.
on that? When we talked about the idea of having this designation in this area, we really started talking about that after we'd already been working with the developer for some of the property included here for a couple of years. In fact, they had designed subdivisions for a good part of the area that I'm kind of circling right there, a few hundred lots with the R112 zone in mind. And as we started to talk about what parts of the community maybe makes sense for some bigger lots, in fact, I came to the planning commission and kind of tested the water with you and got direction to have a meeting with that developer to tell him that we thought it was most appropriate if he changed his plans and dropped his density by a certain number of units and redesigned things with the anticipation of that being zoned R115. And frankly, they've been very good to work with, and they've done that. We reviewed concept plans for project, again, in that area. And for want of a sewer lift station that needs to be constructed to serve this entire area, its development, that project right now is just on the shelf. So depending on when first Sunrock property develops, which will install the first of two legs of infrastructure that's needed to make this area developable, including the subject property and what I'm talking about to the north. Once that happens, then I think you'll see other improvements made. Maybe in 2018, I think it's much more likely at this point that it'll be 2019. But from my perspective, the fact that we have basically a development project that's designed at this point with the developer that thinks it's financially viable to develop 15,000 square foot lots. They're also a home builder. They know what they're getting into. One thing that he and I have discussed, some of the highest priced real estate for single-family detached homes in Utah County is on floodplain property. Look in Hobble Creek Canyon, you can look Provo River Bottoms, places like that, where you don't see basements, but yet developers have been able to make things work. Home owners still live in homes that are 7,000 and 8,000 square feet, which we haven't done a lot over the years in Spanish Fork to try to require that kind of development. And that's why I think the point that Kevin made earlier, we have a really small part of our overall inventory of homes in Spanish Fork that kind of fit that mold, which is partly why we started having this discussion is people in influence in Spanish Fork saw more and more friends moving to Mapleton, Salem, Elk Ridge, and so forth because they wanted to build houses that they couldn't fit on lots in Spanish Fork. So we think it's viable. We've heard that from the development community. Now whether you think that's best or right, that's for you to decide, but just one other thought.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? What are our options motion-wise tonight? From your opinion, if all you're looking for is an opinion, or are you looking for a recommendation to the?
If you're trying to make a recommendation, that certainly would be best. So whether it's to approve or deny, you can continue it as well. So you can have those three options at your disposal. Depending on what action you take, that I think helps it. That helps make it easier for us to sit down with the applicant and try to give them some guidance on maybe next steps. Should you, for example, recommend that it be denied, they may or may not want to proceed forward and go to the city council. They certainly could get the city council's ultimate decision on the proposal.
I guess I don't see any reason to continue it. It's either we agree with it or don't, I think.
That's how I see it.
So if we think it should be changed, then we would recommend approval. If we think it should stay the same, we would recommend denial. Is that? Anyone want to make a motion then?
I would make a motion that the Evans General Plan Amendment be denied.
I'll second.
Got a motion by Commissioner Mendenhall, a second by Commissioner Tagg. Any further discussion on that motion? Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Okay, our next item on the agenda is the conditional use permit for hideout storage.
Might not make any friends by suggesting this, but I know we want to have a robust discussion on hideout storage. And the Larson Smith zone change, for example, in my opinion, might be a very quick discussion. So if the commission would be comfortable maybe hearing that one real quick first.
I think these guys have all, waited long enough.
Want me to put it on the screen? We can watch it.
Maybe we could have a quick update.
I think that's really the only other item that we have on the agenda tonight that we expect you to take action on, where we have an applicant here, so that's why
Yeah,
I suggested that.
no, I think it's on the agenda. Let's keep it going.
So hideout storage, this is a proposed conditional use to build we call it a self-storage warehouse, that's what the code refers to it as, on property that's zoned I-2. It's at the corner of Arrowhead Trail and Del Monte Road.
Can you pull that mic closer to you, Dave? They was hanging up sign up on the back.
Thank you, I couldn't see it.
Self-storage warehouses are a conditional use in the I-2 zone. It's one of the few zoning districts that allows storage unit projects by right, if you will. We've been discussing this concept with this applicant for a number of months. We've brought different concepts to the Planning Commission on a couple of different occasions. The DRC last reviewed this just a week ago, and the recommendation that the Development Review Committee has made is that the project be approved, subject to a few conditions being met that we've outlined in the staff report. The nature of the proposal really has two parts to it. First of all, again, here for conditional use approval, which essentially just means for you as the land use authority, what conditions do you feel are appropriate to impose upon the development to reasonably address any anticipated adverse impacts that the project might create. So that's sort of step one. Now also, back quite a few years now, when we first saw a proposal to build storage units on this property, the city council amended our ordinance to potentially allow in the I-2 zone for an applicant to have a reduced setback. And that can happen at the sole discretion of the Planning Commission. In this case, the applicant has requested that the setback be reduced. If you can pull up,
That one?
if you have the
Better one?
more up-to-date one, that might be helpful. So in this case, in fact, the applicant really has proposed two different options. So I think those are things that we want to discuss. But maybe focus on this. I think this is their preferred option. Instead of having a 50-foot setback, which means there would be 50 feet of distance between the outside edge of the sidewalk, which really is the outside of the right-of-way for Del Monte Road, or the outside edge of the trail, which is the edge of the right-of-way, or what's owned by the public versus what's owned privately. 50 feet from each of those two locations to the nearest building. Now, in this case, the applicants have suggested that they would like to build buildings closer to the public right-of-way than 50 feet. 35 feet is the minimum that they've proposed to be required to maintain. And what they've discussed with staff, at least, is that they propose to justify that by developing more lavish, intense landscaping within that 35-foot area than what they would do with maybe a bigger setback. And if we can look at the other option to kind of talk about that. So this is the second part of the proposal. Again, the first one is, what conditions do you think are appropriate to impose on the project but then really just relative to how the project gets designed. Another option, aside from maybe reducing that setback, in this case here, with this kind of a design, they maintain a full 50 feet from the edge of the right-of-way to all of the buildings. But in fact, the landscaping, at least with the way they proposed it, is less than what is designed into the other approach, if you will. Again, relative to what that setback is, certainly up to 50 feet, that's entirely at the discretion of the Planning Commission. So in my view, it's really a question of, if we look at these as kind of two different models or approaches that somebody could take for developing this property, it's up to you. You get to make that decision. This last thing for me, maybe relative to the conditional use kind of component, as we talked about it as staff, storage units are a lot of things that we don't necessarily like as staff. Opportunities earlier tonight already, and I kind of get to wear two hats for the city. So like I said, we're very, very jealous about property that has the potential of doing one of three different things for us. We absolutely love retail development that's done the right way, that's viable, that helps commerce occur in the city. And really that largely is because of sales tax and how reliant municipalities are in Utah, like us, on sales tax to provide basic services. So we don't want to miss opportunities for retail development. Also, we love development that makes really expensive investments in property, because that leads to potentially at least some benefit on the property tax side of things. And we also love development that that can support employment, whether it's professional office kinds of uses or manufacturing, whatever the case might be. In many different respects, we view that as a positive for a community, and we like that. And not to bash storage units too brazenly, but they don't do really any of those three things for us as a city. So while we don't view storage units as necessarily the highest and best use of locations in the community, and frankly, I think this is a location that certainly has the same potential to support some non-residential uses as the Sunrock corner has across the street that, you know, again, we've talked a lot about this past year. At this point in time, the zoning is what it is, and there's a long history that has led to the zoning being the way that it is at this location. And again, self-storage units here, they're a use that somebody can develop by right, and that's something that we certainly respect as a city, those property rights that these applicants have. And for that reason, again, we've recommended that the project be approved, but what we know that you guys will handle appropriately is helping us get the conditions right. So the applicants don't have an opportunity to dictate what those conditions are, how the project might look, and you know, maybe things like building materials or any of those sorts of things. But as we talked about this particular proposal as staff, we do not anticipate there being an adverse impact should the property develop with storage units in terms of traffic. We don't anticipate there being an adverse impact with the storage unit development in terms of noise or lighting or lots of the other things that a lot of times we really zero in on when we're trying to make sure that the impact of a use is softened so it doesn't impact, you know, maybe neighbors adversely. But we do think there definitely is a responsibility that we enjoy to make sure that aesthetically the project looks as good as it can, understanding what it is. And we certainly appreciate whatever guidance you can give us and the applicants relative to, you know, maybe landscaping and building design or any of those kinds of things. So this is a public hearing, and this is one of the items that the commission is the land use authority on. So tonight you have same three options relative to approving, denying, or continuing the proposal, and
Would it still go to the city council then?
No.
No?
and you guys are the land use authority on this, so this is one of those things where the buck stops with the planning commission.
Could we invite Jason up from the legal side to talk about conditional use permits so that we are educated on the legal side of it? Thanks, Jason. You're not prosecuting us, please.
No, I'm not. I'm only part-time prosecutor right now. So in Title 10, Chapter 9A, Section 507 of the Utah Code, it addresses what a conditional use is. And by standard,
So that's state law?
that
what
is
you're saying?
state
Okay.
law. By standard, it is, let me just read the definition so everybody knows it. A conditional use shall be approved if reasonable conditions are proposed or can be imposed to mitigate the reasonably anticipated detrimental effects of the proposed use in accordance with applicable standards. In accordance with the applicable standards would refer to our code.
City
City's
standards.
code. B is if it reasonably anticipated detrimental effects of proposed conditional use cannot be substantially mitigated by proposal or the imposition of reasonable conditions to achieve compliance with the applicable standards, the conditional use may be denied. Now, in our case, in our code, we have two spots that basically that it could be denied. One of those is health. So if a proposal is something that is detrimental to people's health, or the other one is safety, meaning if chemicals are being distributed into the air or environmental issues are coming up, then that could be a reason to deny. For the most part, if any reasonable conditions can be set on it, such as landscaping or traffic mitigation, things like that, then it has to be approved. And so, this isn't an issue of a zone change at all. This has been zoned this way for quite some time. So because of that zone, this applicant has the right to ask that this be changed to get the conditional use approval. That approval is simply, the way we put it, is they have the right to the property, as Dave said, and the right to use and build storage units essentially on that property, along with a lot of other things that they could technically build. The only constraints they would have would be some of those other uses might be slightly too big for such a piece of property. But the storage units so your job here today is to focus in on and implement and make sure that the applicant knows and understands the conditions that are going to be applied. And we would ask you to follow that.
So can you explain, from a legal viewpoint, what would happen if, as a planning commission, we were to deny this conditional use?
We have to have a good reason by our code, and we would have to use one of those health and safety concerns. And if it doesn't meet that, the next step would be the appeal authority, which in our case is the city council. If that doesn't happen, for instance, let's say somebody tried to do a zone change or something, because the applicant is already in the process, it would be considered for us called a takings. We would be required to then purchase the property or pay the value for the property. We don't even get the property. We would have to just pay the value of it, and that would happen in a lawsuit. If the appeal authority still didn't believe that, so they could reverse your findings and send it back and essentially approve it themselves, is the way it would work. Or, at that point, if they followed along with what you did in denial, then the applicant could go to district court and file a lawsuit. Staff has reviewed it, my office has reviewed it. There is nothing that we see that is anything that cannot be, any detriment that might be there cannot be overcome with the reasons to deny in our code.
So our role then is to determine what are the potentially detrimental effects. That's the term it's used, right? and then what conditions we can determine the conditions that to impose upon the project that will mitigate those anticipated detrimental effects.
Correct. Any other questions?
Oh, but we might not be done with you yet, so don't go too
That's
far
okay.
away.
I'm not going very far.
Okay. Any questions for staff before we go to a public hearing? I do have one question.
We didn't spend much time talking about like the proposed architecture, that sort of thing. Should run through slides there
Sure.
in case
Yep.
anybody
Yep.
is not familiar with at least what's proposed.
So,
There is an office that would be constructed on the Del Monte side of the project, at least with what's designed. I think if you go to that document, that probably gives us,
this one?
yeah, scroll down. So
Oh, there you go.
this would be located near the only entrance to the proposed project, again, on the Del Monte side. Kind of a contemporary kind of architecture.
So are these the colors they're also proposing?
Yeah, I'll let the applicant speak to that in a minute. And then just the broader perspective of what, again, the applicants have proposed. I think I'd maybe better say that their preferred option would have the buildings be constructed at the 35-foot setback line, so the elevation underneath these. Mr. Clark, scroll down a little bit. So basically, as I understand it, it's a split-face concrete masonry unit kind of construction with some accents on a certain interval. So these are the two things that you would see from Del Monte and Arrowhead. Now, if you don't mind going back to the latest version of kind of the overall plan that we have for the site. Do you have the other one? Just,
Landscape one or the,
let's call it, yeah, landscape one.
uh,
And again, this is just relative to what the applicants have proposed. Let's look at this for just a second. So as proposed, this area here, both on Arrowhead Trail and Del Monte, we have the area that's between the sidewalk and the curb. We call that the park strip. And this is part of the public right-of-way, part of the street right-of-way. That would just be grass with trees on the Arrowhead Trail side. Regardless of what happens, trees planted in that park strip are going to be limited, or we would be limited in terms of the different species that somebody could utilize because of the power lines that are there. So that likely would just be an ornamental kind of a tree. In the park strip, I believe you could do bigger trees on the private property side of things. They're proposing basically a swale then between the building and the public right-of-way, a combination of trees and shrubbery with cobblestone. I'm guessing like 4-inch minus, maybe 6-inch, something like that, in the bottom there, which I think also serves a stormwater detention component for the project, with turf grass on the sides of that and shrubbery right next to the building. And of course, this concept could be employed whether the setback's 35 feet or 50, and whether there's a wall here or someplace else. But that's just a little bit more description on what we've looked at as staff.
With the landscape requirements that the city has, how does this compare in terms of number of trees, required landscaping?
I think this meets our requirements, so we'd require trees 30 feet on center, basically around the entire project, adjacent to the public rights of way, and also where the project abuts any residential district, which would be both the west and north property lines. And it does appear like the applicants met our minimum requirements. Oftentimes, sort of the nature of conditional uses, though, is that people are required to exceed your baseline requirements, and I haven't yet heard the applicants say that they're not willing to do that. And I'll say this as well. I think if a project like this aesthetically has any particular drawback or or the big hurdle to overcome anytime, whether it's a fence, wall, or wall of a building adjacent to the public rights of way. How do you make that somewhat interesting from a visual perspective? Sometimes how that gets landscaped, adjacent to that, that can play a big role in dressing that up and making it look better. A lot of times that's not enough. Like I said, the applicants have made an effort at least to try to do something with that elevation so it's not just a big blank expanse. But in reality, I think that's what it's kind of hard to overcome. It's hard to make that so it doesn't just look like a big blank, even plane.
And what about on-site parking? What's required for on-site parking?
We actually have a fairly stringent requirement, but it's pretty easily met. I can check on the number for you, but in the past, we've allowed people to identify parking spaces throughout the project, adjacent to units and so forth. And it's a large number that we require, but again, it's pretty easily satisfied.
Or would that need to be designated? I mean, it's not designated except for the four that are there at the entry.
We've done it as simply as having the applicants give us a plan that shows where that parking can be utilized. The last storage unit project I think that we approved is the one that's on US 6, kind of approaching the mouth of the canyon. I believe there we did say, though, they've got to stripe at least the majority of the parking spaces that are required throughout.
Do you know how many spaces that ended up?
I can check real quick. I think I do have that number. Frankly, I'm not sure that our code is really in touch with the reality of how a project like this works, which is basically that when somebody goes to a unit, right, they park adjacent to the unit, and with 30-foot drive aisles, that's more room than we have on a local street, for example, for two-way traffic and parking. So I can't imagine that ever being an issue.
Is outdoor storage allowed in these?
It's allowed in the I-2 zone. I would say that particularly given this being a conditional use and where we're not seeing it on a proposed plan, that's not at all part of what you're considering tonight. So if somebody wanted, should a plan like this be approved tonight without that being identified, if somebody wanted maybe to add outdoor storage at some future date, I think they'd have to come back to have their conditional use amended by the Planning Commission. And I haven't heard the applicants say that they intend to do that, but that probably would be good to discuss with them.
Sorry, I've been asking all the questions. I've taken Kevin's job tonight.
Did you talk about parking? Okay, and their required limits? Okay.
I'd like to maybe, before we turn it over to the public hearing, talk about some of the due diligence we've tried to do as a planning commission to look at what we perceive as good-looking or decent-looking projects elsewhere. I think with storage units historically, there's some bad examples everywhere of what somebody wouldn't want in their neighborhood. And where we've got a situation where this is zoned, we really don't have a choice other than to pick conditions, types of construction, then that's the best thing we can do for the community is create that top-of-the-line, neighbor. We got some pictures that I'd like to have you show up there. There's one in particular in St. George called Swiss Storage. I'm familiar with this project. Drive by it quite a bit. It's right amongst other residential properties and gated communities, and it's not a bad-looking project. Personally, I don't think it's too bad-looking of a project. They've got a architectural fence there that is pleasing. It's not a constant, height. I think if we can put some designs into this, it could still be a decent-looking project compared to, what it could look like in a negative way. But again, if you blew that up, there is homes all the way around this place, and you've probably driven by it yourself on Dixie Dixie Down and near Sunset.
I don't spend nearly enough time in St. George.
Yeah.
So conditional use, can you limit what's displayed? If you go back to that storage, I wouldn't want to be coming out of that subdivision and right in front of me in huge print, huge letters is the name of the storage units with their phone number, like we just saw there. Is there a way to limit how they market or how they display that?
And to add on to that, I think, one of the thoughts I have had is to limit, I can't speak, lighted signs along Del Monte Road, so that at night, that light doesn't transfer down into the adjacent neighborhood. So lighted signs along Arrowhead makes sense. I don't have a problem with that, but going the other direction, that would be part of my thought process too, kind of along with. And can we limit election signs? Just kidding. That's a pet peeve, election signs. You see the election sign right there? Drives me crazy to see.
You can do something about everything but the election signs.
Okay.
Fifth Amendment issue there, but when it comes to other kinds of signage, you do, absolutely, that's within your purview. One of the remaining conditions that we recommend that you consider as staff. In fact, I think we noted it just in the staff report by way of the elevations that they provided for the project. They really just kind of indicate that they anticipate having some wall signage right at the office, and that's it. And short of them talking about having additional signage as part of the conditional use approval, I think that's what they're limited to. Our ordinance does allow monument signs, so they could do that, one both on Arrowhead and Del Monte. Maximum height of 8 feet, total square footage on each side of a sign like that would be 48 feet, which 8 feet tall, it's, if it were standing right here next to me, pretty good sized sign. But for a road, particularly like Arrowhead Trail, that's a pretty diminutive amount of signage. We would not anticipate pole signs or different things like that. So for the applicants, if that's anything they're considering, they want to talk through tonight, this would be the time to talk about that. But yeah, I think the project with the Swiss theme for me clearly illustrates how you can take maybe some architecture that has have a little bit of class to it, a decent look, and kind of wreck it with unnecessary and just more signage than what you need. So I think I would really appreciate it, in fact, if we spend some time talking about that. And maybe we define it in terms of area or location and those things. But that, in my view, absolutely is an impact that a project like this has on the broader community and is fair game to talk about.
I'd like to suggest that we do the public hearing first, and then that the applicant can hear the concerns of the public along with us, and then when we close the public hearing, then we can have that conversation with them. Is that okay with you guys?
Yeah.
So before we go into public hearing, let me just kind of talk through the process. As you've heard before, with this use, it's a use that can be put here. At this point of the game, it's long past whether or not this use can or can't be there, because it can be. So what we're looking for is some input from you guys, because you live here. I've driven by this many times because my kid's piano teacher lives in your neighborhood, and so we've been by this many times. So what we need, but you guys live there a whole lot more than I do. So help us understand what you perceive as the adverse impacts of this opportunity, not opportunity, but of this facility. And if you have a suggestion, I'm an architect by profession, so as I work with contractors and they come to me and say, you've got a problem in your drawings, those things happen. And what I appreciate with them is when they say, you've got a problem and here's my suggestion. So if you have a suggestion for how to handle that impact that will benefit and make it not so much of a detrimental effect upon you, that will be helpful too. We would like to limit you to 3 minutes in your comments, please. And I know this is hard to do but if something's already been said, you don't need to say it twice. So please pay attention to what your neighbors are indicating and so forth. So with that, did I miss anything? Okay. Again, I can't tell you how many meetings I've been in here where there's been nobody in here. And so I really do appreciate you taking the time out of your schedules to come here tonight. So I'll entertain a motion to move into public hearing.
I'll make a motion that we move into public hearing.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Kimberly, do I need to repeat who makes the motion, or you're a pretty smart girl?
I got it.
Okay,
Your guys' voices all sounded a little different.
I'll go first, guys.
great, thank you.
I know many of you probably have read my email that got forwarded around, and when I say we, I mean me too. We really blew it on this zoning, and I just want to put that out there. I want the owner of this to know that the city council can support an idea of a zone change, and it's not too late for him to change what he's putting in there. It'd be wonderful to see a mixed use on that corner, and I'd even be for some low density behind it. I'll get that out of the way. As it relates to this project, and if you'll go to the plat plan of that, showing that, yeah, that's this view. With this project moving forward, which obviously you know that I'm completely against, I would ask the council to put just the full ordinances in place and not allow any variances. In fact, I've got one concern right here, and I like the idea of 50 foot. I'd like to get this as far away from the street as we can. But if you'll back that out even more, I even got some concerns up here on this end and this end. This will eventually be homes as well. And there's no reason why these neighbors ought to back up right to a fence to a storage unit. I'd like to see a 50-foot setback also in place here of landscaping before the next building with the property fence in place to allow these homeowners to not have some type of a concrete fence or cinder block fence right up adjacent to their home as well. I know that that's not happening here now, but we're taking care of that on these corners. But what about the folks that move in here, or if this gets rezoned, which I hope y'all change that quickly?
It's actually rural residential right now.
Okay, terrific, that's very good. So, and that's what this is as well, I believe, if we
Yeah.
did a zoning map. So you've got some neighborhoods to consider here of what's gonna be impacted on them. And, you know, we've got some nice neighborhoods around there that we've had some ordinances that we've had to keep up with for building materials and such, and heights. I'd like this to fall under those same type ordinances, as far as what they're putting in the outside of this home, as far as what they're putting on the roofs, and the heights they're going, needs to fit into the homes that are all around it. And those are some different ordinances that we've all kept, and there's no reason why we shouldn't have this. If this truly wants to incorporate in the neighborhood, it ought to have the neighborhood ordinances, and that's not cinder block and steel. You know, we didn't put that on our homes. I wouldn't want to see it out in the middle of my neighborhood. So some of my concerns. Any questions for me?
No,
I
don't-
covered
I don't.
everything accurately. One last thing, you know, when we saw the overview map, I did see some areas of blue throughout the city, sandwiched in possible future neighborhoods. Let's get on top of that. We don't want to see concrete plants popping up in the middle of a neighborhood, or, you know, they belong on the outskirts, because that's where they usually are. But we've got this beautiful one right by the river too, that you guys are working on developing. There's a swath of blue through there. It's all agricultural now, but it's gonna be homes. Let's get on top of that general planning and not allow this type of, this type of thing to happen in the future. So, thank you.
thank you. Mr. Anderson, can I ask a question as related to that? In a mixed-use general plan designation, industrial zoning would not be one of the options. Is that accurate?
We have an industrial general plan designation. That's the only thing that I think
Okay.
industrial
So
zoning would be.
I think to your comment, anything within that blue would not be industrial.
Oh, okay, I
So-
saw that was the color there, so I just assumed.
Right, yep. Okay, thank you so much.
Good officer.
Who else would like to come up and talk with us? We're not that scary, are we?
Scared because you said if they have the same thing to say, don't
You just said it all.
I hadn't came for this specific purpose, but I wanted to ask the planning commission while it's here, is there a mechanism, do you have a mechanism to go back after approval has been made on projects? There's a lot of promises that are floated around and approvals made. Does the commission ever go back and make sure that those promises are fulfilled?
So as a planning commission, we rely on staff to ensure that that whatever's been agreed to or the conditions that are placed on this particular project, they have to go through a whole site plan approval process with the city. So they're not even close to being done with this process. And so I've done it many times here in Spanish Fork City. So any kind of condition or requirement that's required by code gets reviewed thoroughly by staff. And if it doesn't pass muster to those commitments or conditions or the ordinance that's already in place, then it doesn't move forward. So.
Well, I just bring it up because, you know the old mill estates across the street there in Mill Road, there was a lot of promises made there. And there's a lot of promises that's not been kept there, and so rather than compound an existing problem, there should be some mechanism to make sure that what's said is done.
Great. Thank you. I appreciate that comment.
Dan Valls, 383 West River Ray Road. Could you bring back up that general plan again that you showed earlier on the development? So.
You said Dan Valls?
Dan Valls, yeah. V like in Victor, O-W-L-S, yeah. So this obviously is the subject property we were talking about, which on the general plan was shown as a mixed use. This was a little bit of commercial we talked about earlier, but everything else you see around here is all low-density residential. I don't see any high-density or even medium-density residential in this area. So my question, first of all, is typically, and I've rented in storage units before when I lived in an apartment, but I lived right down that road in a 4,500 square foot home, 3-car garage, which is like a lot of my neighbors here and these houses here. And I've got one of my neighbors here. Do you rent a storage unit? No. And my feeling is, and I don't know without surveying all of them, that most of those people have large enough homes that they do not rent in a storage unit. So back to the point of this use in a storage unit should be along the I-15 where a lot of the others are at, and that should never have been zoned an industrial zone, an I-2 at that. People could say, well, you got Sunrock across the street here, but as we know, 206 homes are going to be going into that development there. So that, I would hope that the applicant would think about what they're proposing here, and is that really the best use for this area, and really back to this general plan of sticking industrial in the middle of a sea of residential with some commercial on some corners. So that's, obviously, I don't even want to get into the architecture, because I've been in the architectural profession myself for 34 years. And when I look at those elevations of that building, could you bring up those elevations?
Sure.
I mean,
Which one is it? There we go.
go, okay, well, let's just talk about this. Okay, so the plans that you have do not call out the height of the masonry wall around the development. I'm assuming it's
9'4", I think.
Well, no, but I think that's the structures.
So
Top of
based
masonry.
on this plan, there won't be a wall around the unit. So if you go back to the ground
So
level.
it would function as a fence. And
That right there would
building
be
wall
the
is what you're
building
saying.
wall.
Yeah.
There would be no wall between the buildings
Right,
and the rest.
so yeah, so again, back to your comment of you'd be looking at the backside of these buildings.
Yeah.
This landscaping here is more embellished than the ones that were basically in the packet that we received. So, because there was some deception even on that, the diagram I received showed 64 trees around here, and yet their legends called out for 23 trees. So it's, and I've done plenty of these on the opposite side, and, typically, if you're going to show that kind of landscaping, you better have a legend, which it looks like they've now created. But no, so now go further to the elevation that's actually the close-up one. Go to the next one. Yeah, this right here. Okay, so pull down a little bit. Go down a little further. Okay, so here we're talking about, and I don't even know I don't see a height. Looks like your laser's dying out. You got another one?
There's a spare, I think, up there.
Okay. So I don't see a height even of what these elevations are on this, but if I'm looking at that, if that's a 7-foot door, I'm 14, I'm probably over 20 feet to the top of that peak right there. So here I'm coming out of my development, and I'm seeing a building that's got, first of all, I'm sorry, Vincent Design Group, but that is not a very appealing looking building. And I've got large signage plastered right on the facade of that, which you're going to be able to see. So back to the comment I believe you made about architectural that fits into the area. As I drive through my neighborhood, I don't see any contemporary modern designs like this. And I like contemporary modern design. A lot of the buildings I do are, but not stuck in the middle of residential where you have a little bit more of a classical type design. So I think the elevations of this do not fit in whatsoever in that development. The heights of this, I mean, if you're going to do that, reduce the heights of these as much as possible so they're not, you know, a sloped. I'm guessing this is probably going to be a metal roof on top of this thing.
You got one more minute if you don't mind.
Well, I do mind because we sat here and talked 15 minutes on how to on the one zone that's being annexed that the applicant isn't even here of whether it should be commercial or residential.
Right.
I'd say if the applicant isn't there, then I would have zoned it residential and made him prove that they wanted to go to commercial. So I have some other points that I'd like to make.
But we established the rules of 3 minutes per person, so we want to give everybody else a chance.
Okay, well
and
then,
not
you know what,
keep
I'm
us
just gonna
in
go
for
to
the rest of the night.
my final argument on this, and that goes to Jason, legal. Could you tell me what the notice requirements are for Spanish Fork City?
For public hearings, we send letters to everybody, that's within 300 feet,
What is the,
orders of record.
and what is the time on that?
We send the notices 10 days before a public hearing.
Now, is that sent or is that received? Because in my mind, a notice is not effective until I am notified as a resident.
We typically send them 14 days before, so that typically they're received 12 days before a public
Correct.
hearing.
All right, so the first notice I got on this was mailed out on April 20th, which would have gave you, when I received it, that was well within the 10 days. But unfortunately, this was for a zone change. So then on April 24th, it was mailed out, stamped from Provo City because of a corrected notice for a conditional use. I received this 8 days prior to this public notice. So as far as I'm concerned, everything that's been discussed here today on this project needs to be tabled till the next Planning Commission meeting, because based on the city ordinances and the state code of open and meeting acts, the city has not abided by the ordinances they have or the laws that are from the state of Utah.
I would like to address that. So I talked to,
You better use the mic, Kimberly. Yeah.
so the legal requirement is to post it on the state website as well as publish it in a newspaper. We publish it in the Daily Herald on Sundays. Most people don't read the newspaper. I do it on Sundays because they are most likely to read it then. And those two notices say conditional use permit. The mailer is a different form that we used. It was labeled incorrectly as a zone change. When it was brought to my attention Monday morning, first thing I did is I called our legal department, Junior Baker, and he stated that the mailer is the courtesy and that we were completely fine.
Well, I guess I have a different interpretation, and let me go ahead and read what your land use code says on that. So, notices informing of public hearings shall provide a minimum of 10-day notice and shall be given as follows. Zone map changes, zone text amendments, and comprehensive general plan amendments shall be published in a newspaper of general circulation within the city. Conditional use permits and specific property zone changes shall be posted on the subject property and mailed to all property owners located within 300 feet of the subject properties. Land use ordinance amendments shall be mailed, sent by facsimile, or emailed to affected entities. So as far as I'm concerned, you still do not meet the intent of your code, which is 10-day notice of when I should have received this. And the reason they do that is so that a developer or anybody else can't send a notice out a day or two before a public hearing where people have not had a chance to be noticed of it, make arrangements, and actually do a little bit of research into what's trying to be, should I say, shoved down their throat. So as far as I'm concerned, if I was the council tonight, I would recommend tabling this item till the next planning commission so that you don't have any chance, because if this does get approved and somebody decides to challenge it on the legal basis, everything that's decided tonight would be null and void, and you would be back doing it all over again. So I think it's prudent in the planning commission's behalf to table it, follow the proper 10-day notice, and bring it forth for a public hearing again in 2 weeks or whenever you meet again.
Thank you. We
And
appreciate
Mr. Chairman, just relative to that, to be clear, we as staff, we're totally comfortable. If you want to continue it tonight for that or any other reason, we always make sure to follow the direction that we get from our legal counsel. That's why we do feel comfortable telling you tonight, if you care to take action on it, we think that that is appropriate. But if for any reason, including, concerns about the notice, you want to continue it, that doesn't concern us at all.
My opinion, I don't think at this point, at least before we continue it, I'd still like to hear from the developer and the rest of the residents that have questions.
Okay.
I'm Dan Higginson, I'm a partner in this, along with my brother Jeff, born and raised here, lived here our whole lives, love the community, and we're very sensitive to that piece of property. We spent lots of money, lots of due diligence, soil samples to meeting with people in Quail Hollow that aren't here tonight. Sam Higginson, my brother, Larry Hells, a dear friend, my attorney Kyle Dart, who are all very much in favor of this project. Why? Because of the research that we did. You see, everybody we talked to at ALA High School, the big concern was, what's this traffic load going to be like? Well, how many people in here have a storage unit, honestly?
A what?
A storage unit.
Got a couple.
Okay, we got a few guys that are partnering in the project, right? I've been to my storage unit next to Road Barge Collision once to pick up my snowmobiles, charge them, and then drop them off. 10 homes on that piece of property, there's 100 trips a day, documented proof. On a storage unit, a trip is considered in and out, is that right, Mr. Menlove? In and out, 2. On a project at full capacity would be 37 trips. A lot of the citizens love that idea. We also went to the citizens of Quail Hollow and said, hey, we love the community. We don't want to have enemies. What do you want it to look like? What colors? What earth tones? Which we brought, prepped to bring. We understand what people would be challenged, but we also know what's developing from between there and the freeway going on down that main corridor, which is a lot of homes, unfortunately, a lot of homes, which require a lot of storage. And that's based on real study and real fact and a lot of investment dollars. So for the people that are against our project, we just want you to know we're here to be great corporate citizens. We don't want enemies. We're here because we want a win-win environment. We're here because we want to reduce traffic. We're here because if you're our clientele and you're across the road, that traffic just dwindled that much more, and those kids that are going to school at ALA and coming back and forth at that nasty light, that traffic's been reduced compared to what that's zoned for and what we could put on it. Which I promise you, people in that residential area, which are 4 different projects that were presented, people going up in arms. We're going to beautify this. We're going to have this thing landscape at the highest level, and we're going to do it to be a great corporate citizen. That's all I have to say to anybody else that's against it.
Thank you, Mr. Higginson. Anybody else like to address the commission with?
Can I make one more comment?
Sure.
I sat down, now I got 3 more minutes. Could you bring that site plan up one more time? There was one other concern I had. You know, again, when as I look at this site plan, and maybe the applicant can clarify this to me, but I don't see anywhere where there's a dumpster located on this. So I've rented in storage units, and typically when, Bob leaves there, and he only takes half his stuff with him because it's been sitting there for 5 years or whatever, what does he do with it? He doesn't haul that off to the landfill. If there's not a dumpster there, guess what? It's piled right there in front of his unit when he last checks out. So I think, first of all, that's an item that definitely needs to be added to some conditions is you've got to have dumpsters. Those should be screened. I don't want to see a dumpster that's, sometimes you see, as I look at this, your only location probably for dumpsters can be back in this back corner so a trash truck can get in and pick it up. And then I would want to make sure that thing is screened.
Yeah. City requirement is for it to be screened 100%. No, can't be a chain link fence.
There's
or anything,
variations on screening. I can put some slats in a chain link fence.
That does not count. I have developed 5 or 6 buildings here in this city as an architect, and that will not fly here. I can.
All right. So I would make sure that as long as it's a block enclosure with some gates and stuff, because there's a lot of.
I got you.
All right. So I'd like the applicant to address, I guess, that item right now.
Okay, we'll
'Cause
put
I may have another one after that.
We'll put that on the list here.
Say something real quick. And this might be an area we could utilize. We talked about safety and environmental, if possible, blockages. I wonder if we could do a study on criminal activity in storage units. It's there. We know that's there. I've had a local officer in the neighborhood talk to me about it. And this site's also going to be environmentally controlled, some of the units, with storage of maybe chemicals that could be environmentally dangerous. So I wonder if that could be a couple of reasons that the commission could consider not allowing this to move forward. Just a thought.
Thank you.
Would you like my opinion about it?
Sure.
We always want you're actually usually the quietest guy in the room, Jason, so we're glad to have you come up and share a few things.
I have been a prosecutor for about 17 years now. I have done felony work and I have done misdemeanor work for the last 8. Storage units as a whole, there is not a lot that happens. Now, occasionally you'll get people that will store stolen items or something, so maybe occasionally you'll get the police will show up and with a search warrant and take those items. But aside from that, there is not a lot of criminal activity that actually goes on in them. One, our city does prohibit any use or any business use inside of each unit individually. So you couldn't run a business, you couldn't run an operation, you can't run an illegal operation either, for that matter.
Unless you get caught.
Well, unless you get caught. Our police department's pretty good about taking complaints and going and researching things. Storage units, like I said, for the most part, you get occasionally stolen property and that kind of stuff in them, and then usually it's searched and seized and taken out. But aside from that, most illegal activity does not occur there. Illegal activity occurs elsewhere.
Just stored there.
Just could be stored there, officially, yes. But as far as the actual crime itself happening in that spot, no, it doesn't happen.
Thank you, Jason. Is there anybody else in the community that would like to address the commission? We're really not that scary, I hope. Please, come on. I get nervous. You know how many times I've done this? And I get nervous, so don't worry about it. Please tell us your name, though.
I'm Rochelle Anderson.
Rochelle, thank you.
I know you guys kind of brought up the issue of signage as far as for the unit itself. But one of the things that I've been concerned about as I've looked at other units in the area is using those block walls on the outside as advertisement for other businesses. So maybe in your consideration of signage, please maybe make it so that those outside walls couldn't be used as advertisement.
Great, thank you. Anyone else? Come on up. Glad you're here. Really am.
Hi, I'm Laurel Blevins. There hasn't been anything really addressed. Early on, we talked about the height requirements, and I'd like to hear from the developer of some other alternatives on that height or what the height is considered.
Okay. We'll make a note of that and go over that with him. He'll buy you ice cream later.
We are wondering on the landscaping, will there be like an approved landscaping design? Will it have to be submitted that will have all of the?
Yep, that'll be part of the site plan approval
Is
process.
this-
That's similar to what would be submitted. Yep. Yep. In fact, the city requires a licensed landscape architect to be involved for those landscape plans, which I believe they have already, so. Sorry, I'm just trying to take notes here, make sure I don't forget anything. Any other comments, concerns? Thank you for those that did come and share your thoughts. Dan, anything else you think of anything else?
Great.
Yeah.
Well, I got plenty of stuff. I just got started, but, no.
Okay.
Again, I would really hope you would consider that 10-day notice. Really would hate for that to come back on the city.
Sure.
Because I'm not making it a threat, but there's grounds there that you're not following the laws of the city or the state of Utah.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. I'll get yelled at by the guy in the back with say, come to the microphone, so. Okay. Not seeing anybody else that seems real motivated to come up. I'd entertain a motion to exit public hearing.
Chairman, what about?
Oh, we can do that after. In fact, but that helps me remember something though. Thank you, I appreciate that. I just want to acknowledge that we did receive about 5 or 6 emails from various citizens, which we very much appreciate. And so I just want to recognize those. One, I will go through a little bit more in detail because I think they do provide some good things for us to kind of talk through. But I thought I'd make a comment about that, so. Anyway, entertain a motion.
Make a motion to move out of public hearing.
Okay,
I'll second that.
got a motion and a second. Thank you. Developer, I don't know who wants to do it. Come up and let's ask a few questions of you.
Yeah, sounds like I've been designated as the developer.
You're the contractor.
Yeah, I'm the contractor. Ken Berg did the civil engineering. I think Ken Berg's the original applicant for.
Tell us your name if you would,
Higgins.
please, sir.
I'm Ken Menlove
Okay.
with Menlove Construction out of West Jordan, Utah, 4243 West Nike Drive. And
I know where that is.
yeah, it's up there. But I appreciate, thanks for considering this tonight, and I appreciate all the comments from the public. It's really good to get these comments because they're all legitimate comments and concerns. We've been, just a real quick history, we've been building storage units since 1983. We've been in business since 1965. And we have built a lot of storage units over the years that don't look that good. Some of them are very common, some are pretty standard and ugly. But we have built some that have won national awards as well. And to get to your point, we did build the Swiss Bank storage in St. George. That was for Jeff Adams. We've built 3 down there for him, and it's a very nice project. It's a theme, kind of a theme project. We also built like the King Arthur storage. We are building the one on Highway 6 right now, here in Spanish Fork. We did put together a color board, and I'll pass this around. These are some materials that the owners picked out. It's very, very similar, pretty much identical to the one that's built in Springville there on both sides of the freeway. The difference between this one and the one in Springville is and I'll pass these around, but if you go to the elevation sheet, it does show there's more architectural metal and panels, and if you guys want to change this, that's up to you guys as well. But on some of the elevations of the actual storage units, we are using split face block, smooth face block, accents,
and also some architectural metal panels in some of those areas, and on the office as well, where it says metal panels, 2 different colors, things like that. So the design is pretty contemporary. The height of the office is probably, floor-to-floor height is probably about 11 feet, 10 feet. So the overall peak would probably,
You're up to 30 feet.
I'd guess
probably.
about 25 to 30 to the highest peak.
Yeah.
That is true. But the design, the architect that did that, Brent Vincent, wanted to come up with something that would kind of fit in more with the school and some of the other commercial buildings in the area. Some of the storage units in the past that we've done that have office residences just kind of look like houses. They're just pitched roofs with asphalt shingles. They don't even look like houses. They don't look as nice as the houses that are there. They're just really standard looking, and this would look a lot more commercial and more what you'd see with kind of a retail or professional looking building. But I'm sure the applicants are open to your input on the design and any changes there, I'm sure.
Just address the dumpster question.
Yeah, that's a good question on the dumpster. So with storage units, what happens with dumpsters is if a city requires a dumpster, the owner has to keep the dumpster locked 24/7 because they don't want the storage unit users, people that come to the storage units every day, to be able to take their stuff from Christmas and throw it into the dumpster every day because it would fill up every day, and you'd have a truck coming in there every day to dump the dumpster. So what typically happens is when someone exits a storage facility or when they move out, they usually take all of their stuff. If they don't, they leave it in the storage unit. So the trash or junk is actually left in there, and then the storage facility they bring a truck and literally clean it out every time, and for the next tenant. So economically, it's much more economical to not have a dumpster, and it's also a lot easier on the parking lot because the trash trucks destroy the asphalt, and they're very noisy as well when they come and pick up the bins.
So Dave, what's required for this? Would the city require a dumpster enclosure for this type of this facility?
You know, typically we've left it up to applicants as to whether or not they have, for example, a commercial dumpster or not on their project. And I'm not sure that that's the best approach or the best policy. For the most part, it's worked. If they have a dumpster, then it has to be enclosed the way that you described. And it's not uncommon for us to have an argument with an applicant about what it takes to meet those requirements. Although I think people have kind of gotten trained now to where we have fewer arguments.
I have a Spanish Fork dumpster, and I have different city dumpsters. Yeah.
You know who manufactures the steel doors and things like that. But anyway, frankly, I'm at a little bit of a loss. I would certainly expect with a project like this to have a dumpster someplace. I mean, that's my intuitive thought. I've just made a note as to, maybe something to recommend for you to consider would be that the applicant be required to identify a location, or maybe more than that, on their site plan as to where dumpsters would be located, and to provide a detail of the enclosure for us to review as staff. I guess I'm only perplexed because of what Mr. Menlove shared about how sometimes they end up not working really on site, but that's my thought.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Any other comments that you want to make, Mr. Menlove?
No, that's great. And the applicant's not opposed to having a dumpster and having it be enclosed if that's a condition.
Could you talk about limits for what can and can't be stored in these units?
Yeah, as far as limits, when a tenant moves into a storage unit facility, obviously they sign a contract that they're not supposed to store hazardous materials. Obviously, if someone still wants to store something hazardous, that can be a problem, just like.
Hard to control, probably.
It's hard to control, just like it's hard to control what your next door neighbor is storing in his basement. He could be storing methamphetamine or he could be storing illegal products as well. So it's hard to control what they store in there. The good thing about storage units, though, is these are fire-rated walls. They're non-combustible structures. There's no combustible materials, so they're very safe as far as that goes. And as far
What's
as
the
type of
separation
construction.
from unit to unit? What is that?
It's steel.
Oh, steel.
Yeah, so there's no combustible materials, and so, it's hard to control what they store. But if the good thing is if they're not paying their rent and doing things like that, and if they are storing something hazardous, they are ejected from the facility. So, but let's see, what were some of the other questions?
I guess one of the comments that was made just about the applicant considering the best use, why storage units? Is there another use that you could produce there as
That's a really good question. That comes up with a lot of cities, and one thing that
particularly in this location? 'Cause
Yeah,
I think we all see the value. Well, I mean, I've never used a storage unit. So,
Right.
But I know that there are people that live in apartments, that live in smaller dwelling units that
Right.
that have toys and other things that need storage, but particularly in this location, because I personally, I can't disagree
Right.
with the residents that I wouldn't put it here either if I had my choice. But at this point, we're too far down the river down for that.
No, and it's a good question because, and obviously, like one of the applicants said, they've spent a lot of money. They've done market studies, feasibility studies, and they believe it's a great location, and they wouldn't be putting it there if they didn't think it was, because they're investing a lot of money and a lot of resources to put it there. My opinion is if it's not a good place for it, they'll find out someday, and a retail buyer will come in and buy it and tear it down and put something there that's more valuable to a different buyer. So that's kind of how the free market system works. And so, but I think they wouldn't be putting it there if they hadn't done their due diligence.
Do they plan on keeping this property for a while?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Because they're building other facilities too around Utah, so they're getting, it's something they're getting into. So it's a good use for them, so.
What kind of mitigation do you guys gonna have to do with the soils? Because our longtime consultant on the planning commission, who's been in the city forever, sorry, John.
Yeah, that's good.
Talked about the previous
Yeah.
use, that it used to be a pit, right?
Yeah.
Gravel pit.
That was a gravel pit.
So it's
Quite a deep one.
Yes. Yeah, so they have done, as you're aware, they've done a full geotechnical investigation. I'm a structural engineer myself. I'm a PE. I've been practicing for many years as an engineer as well. But yeah, we did a full geotechnical study. Gordon Geotech did that, and they've come up with suggestions and recommendations for the site. The good thing about storage unit facilities is they're very lightweight structures. So as far as bearing capacity goes, they don't require a lot of bearing capacity. They're also a very flexible structure. So even if there was settlements on the order of a ½ inch to an inch, the way these things are built, they're built to span 10 to 20 foot spaces. But the recommendations that they're giving are what we're going to follow in the construction. We're going to over-X under the footings and foundations, bring up good fills, and same thing under the slabs. And then out in the drive aisles, they're just going to make sure that the storm drain systems and everything are going to be piped and controlled, so there's no issues there. But as far as mitigation goes, the measures will be taken. That'll be part of the construction. And we're very conscientious of those things as well. But it's a good structure to put there that way because they're very lightweight. And
What plans do you guys have as far as security? Cameras? You gonna have somebody that actually lives on site?
yes. Yeah, it will be an office residence. Is that right, Brad?
Yeah, our management company is currently trying to decide whether it's gonna be 24-hour, manned, but it'll be
Yeah.
full array of cameras, and motion sensors, and
Right.
it'll have a high security level on it.
Yeah, obviously it'll have an automatic gate, cameras, security system, LED wall pack lighting inside, downward shielded like we do on all the facilities, dark sky lighting. I mean, some cities still like storage facilities to be lit up at night, during the night, and some cities want it to be dark sky. So like at 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock at night, they want the entire facility to be completely dark, and not have the lights on motion sensor or anything. Other cities want the lights to be on all night. So it kind of comes down, that's a city preference. That's something you could recommend as a commission.
Is there a standard for that for Spanish Fork City?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Lighting wise, I know one of the conditions is to provide us a lighting plan.
We're really concerned about two things when it comes to lighting. First of all, that certainly could be an impact that could be detrimental for surrounding property owners if there's spillover. And particularly with a use like this, I don't think you would need to have any light spillover. So that's something that we'd look at when we review a photometric lighting plan. It's pretty easy for applicants to provide that kind of a thing. And it just identifies exactly how much light you have at a property line based on fixtures that they anticipate using and that sort of thing. But also, we might have a little different perspective from some communities where within the project itself, we would expect to have, and admittedly, I think probably a low level of light would be fine here, but we would like to have a relatively uniform amount of light throughout the site, throughout the night, should our public safety people ever need to respond for whatever reason. That can really make certain situations a lot easier to handle.
How do you normally provide, what kind of light system do you normally provide within the facility?
In the drive aisle, so if you go back to that site plan, typically we just provide like wall pack lights.
Mike, could you go to the site plan? Yeah.
Sorry. They're like, so it's literally like, let's see if that pointer's working.
There's another one there next to
Sorry, there we go.
A2. Yep.
So basically, there'll be like a wall pack light. The lights will just be on the inside of the project as far as the site lighting, the exterior lighting. There's no lighting out here on the outside at all, okay? And no lighting out here. The lights will just be wall packs like about every 40 feet, and they're about 8 feet off the ground, and they just shine down. They're shielded down. So when you walk in there at night, and they're LED lights, so they're very low wattage, very environmentally friendly. But when you go in there at night, you literally see about 10 or 12-foot circles on the ground of light. So there's no light pollution, but very little lighting in there. But even still, when you drive down the road, you can tell that it's lit up in here because it kind of sends light up into the sky. And so some cities will say dark sky, so after 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock at night, they want all the lights off. And other cities kind of like the lights to be on in there. And it kind of depends on the police and fire departments, like Dave was saying. But it's very, very low lighting, yeah. No lights in the storage units at all, just lights in these hallways. But the actual individual storage units themselves have no lighting, no power at all. So it's hard for people, they can't go in there and run saws or...
None of the units will be temperature controlled or that type of stuff?
The units will be temperature controlled with just a ductwork down the hall and just an air conditioning and heating duct, return and supply air down the hallways, and that's it. And just lights down the hallways. It'll just be on motion sensors.
So are there garage doors then on the outside and a hallway to access with a man door?
So right here would be like a man door there, and a man door, and a man door that would allow you into the hallways. And then there'll be outside garage doors around the outside there, but the inside units will be insulated roofs.
So it's 2 rows of units on each side of the building, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
2 rows of units, so outside units there, and then inside units here and here down these hallways. So a lot of interior units, which are really popular. They're clean. You're out of the environment. Obviously, no doors out here. If you went to the 50-foot setback like it was shown before, there would be that probably like an 8-foot block or concrete stained fence, and then you would have units on the outside of that building, because with the drive aisle kind of accessing it there. So the 50-foot setback's not, to me, architecturally, it's not as attractive as this. This shields the storage unit doors from the residents more with this option than the 50-foot option. Yeah. And then I would say this would probably be all the 8-foot fence, whatever you require against residential, right?
Materials, I don't know if they did or not. Did they show what the roofing material and the roofing color is going to be?
Yeah, so that they don't show the roofing material, but the roofing, like on the office, can be asphalt shingle, it can be metal. All of these roofs in here are flat. They're really flat roofs. You don't even see the roofs at all. And so they're only 9 feet off the ground.
They're metal.
So these buildings are only 9'4" off the ground. They're very low.
Metal roof then, because of
Yeah.
the low slope nature of the.
Yeah, they're metal roofs, and you don't see them, but the trims and everything will be that dark brown. It's very, very dark buildings, and all block inside, but everything, all the piers inside will be block masonry, and the metal doors will be that dark gray, the silhouette gray. So it kind of hides. They won't be like bright orange or blue or even green. They'll be a pretty low color, kind of a blend-in door.
Other questions for the applicant? One of the versions didn't show, I assume that's going to be the gate there.
Yes.
And so I guess one question I have is, if someone comes with a trailer and pulls in, there's enough, how much depth do we have there before you hit the sidewalk? Do you know what that dimension is?
Just visually looking at it, that's probably a 25-foot back out on the parking and then 20. So I bet you're probably like 50 feet.
Okay.
Yeah, because you got about 20 there, 18 to 20, and that's probably 25.
I guess my question, and maybe this is a staff
Quite a bit
question.
of room, yeah.
What happens if they can't get in? I forgot my key or can't remember my access code.
Yeah.
Should we be requiring some way to turn around rather than having to back a trailer out on a Del Monte? Because you know darn well at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, that's a horrendous situation.
Yeah, so, and that's a real good question. So right here, there'll be a manager in here during their hours of operation, like full-time. You usually have one or two managers. And that's something you guys can set as a commission. I don't know, Brad, what are your hours? What are you guys thinking, Stephen and Brad?
We're planning like 8 to 6.
Yeah. So 8 to 6, 8 to 7 is a full-time manager. And so if, like say if a truck came in here at like 9 o'clock at night and they couldn't get in, that's a good question. I mean, and usually the big moving trucks, we don't see very often anymore at storage units. Usually they're just things. But I'm assuming the moving truck would probably have to pull out here to make sure they could get in first and then pull in. But the keypads, usually on these things, if the keypad fails, the gate will open. So if the keypad isn't working, the gates automatically open and they just stay open, is the way the mechanisms work.
But even if if you're sitting there and you can't remember
Well,
your
if you can't remember
keypad,
your code, if you can't remember your code and the manager's not there, then yeah, you'd have an issue. They'd have to call the manager. So, but they'd have to, I don't think you'd be able to provide a big enough turnaround there to get out. Yeah. Yeah, so they have like a 24-hour call center.
Okay.
Help center, yeah.
Can they open the gate remotely?
Yes.
Yeah, actually,
Yeah, we build a lot of facilities that don't even have offices, and they can actually open them. An owner can open them remotely from their cell phone on the non-office facilities. But yeah, so they're pretty user-friendly.
Just about hours, if you don't mind me asking another question.
Yeah.
I know that some facilities don't allow people in or even maybe out after a certain time of day. Do you guys operate that way?
You know, I think we're open to suggestion on that. Typically, the gate would be accessible by people who have contracts with us 24 hours.
Okay.
But you can definitely limit the gate hours in the gate system.
I don't know if there's value in considering that or not.
Yeah.
Honestly, I just know that some facilities do with that. So, yeah.
That's a good condition to consider because most facilities will close at about 10 or 11 at night. They'll have hours of operation where the gate will shut down, and the only time they can let someone in is if someone's like moving in from California and they have to be there.
made pre-arrangements or something.
Yeah. And usually a lot of times when they do that too, they'll like notify, like Town Storage and Bear River Storage and a lot of these places have an agreement with the police department, and they'll say if someone gets locked behind the gate during business hours or late at night, that they can call the police department, and the police department can come and let them out with their.
I assume the fire department will require a Knox box.
If fire has an
Yeah.
Knox and they have a way to let them out, and the other thing is too, they'll want to let the police know if someone's coming in at 1 in the morning to move something in. Or sometimes you can set a condition and say that they can't do that too, just because of noise ordinance. So there's a lot. Yeah, that's a good question. That's a good point.
Any other questions for staff? Not staff, excuse me, applicant?
Again, how many of these units are conditioned?
I would say the conditioned units, I'm going to guess that in this whole facility, Stephen and Brad, you probably have what, 600 units?
Yeah.
So I'd say 600 units, and I'd say like 150 are conditioned, maybe 200.
So is it like just one building or two buildings?
Every one of these buildings will have a conditioner, heating and air conditioner on it, and it's all the inside units.
Just the interior access.
Yeah, just that interior hallway, when you go down these hallways, just the units inside are climate controlled, we call
What
them.
size are those units, the inside ones?
Anywhere from a 5 by 10 to a 10 by 15 or 10 by 20. 10 by 10, yeah, they just vary in size. But they're always 10 feet wide, is the widest, so.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Menloff. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, thanks you.
I guess I should ask you any more questions. John, you have anything for him? Tracy?
Nope, I'm good.
So I'm just going to jump in because I kind of went through a list in my own mind of things that I would like to suggest that we talk about. So with your permission, I'll go ahead and do that. My first concern that I have is the location of the fence line as it's shown there. And the reason I have a concern about it not being on the property line is because it's not likely that this owner will want to go outside their property line to maintain anything in there. And so I think that's one of my first recommendations for us, is that we suggest that the fence line be moved to the property line so that all of that landscaping can be.
There is a pipe, easement, right there, that we cannot violate.
Okay, well, is that true of the north side as well?
I don't think so, no, it's on the west.
Is that something staff's aware of? Is that, you know?
Totally forgot about that pipe on the west side. The north, there's no.
Southfield Canal pipe.
I think
Come on, John, isn't that your world?
Yeah, that's the Southfield Canal pipe that was just put in this winter.
Yeah.
Okay,
It
that's
was
fair.
an open canal.
John, putting a footing for a wall on that pipe.
Wouldn't be good.
Yep.
No, there's an easement there that is recorded.
I think the concern's certainly valid. And somebody pointed out earlier in the meeting that we would expect at some point in time probably there to be backyards backing onto that. Frankly, the property owners on that side are going to have the same issue. So probably when a development gets approved over there, they're not, in fact, I would think we probably will need to just keep that corridor open and maybe have their rear property line match the easement for the canal or the pipe. We do not like.
So how do we maintain that? That's
We don't
the
like
concern
walled
I'm with.
corridors.
Right.
Sometimes it's just unavoidable. And, you know, like with maintaining any of the landscaping here, I know that's been brought up as a concern. I think first of all, having landscaping installed initially in such a way that you're limiting the need to get in there often and to do much maintenance.
Yeah.
There's no such thing as a maintenance-free situation.
As I say, weed
so-
barriers don't last forever, so.
that, and you have garbage and different things like that, that it requires attention. We require a certain kind of maintenance as the city, which frankly is pretty light. So you could, as a condition of approval, make a specific note about how the applicants maintain that, you know, maybe that they visit the property on a certain, you know, frequency to remove weeds and garbage or anything like that. The more specific you are with a condition, the easier it is for us to keep track of that over time and to enforce it.
Not sure how to make that
Can I ask
condition.
a question about that same area? I mean, I have a couple questions about it. Just like you mentioned, I mean, what's the chances that the future developers of those two areas would consider putting road along there and building so that it's a road and maybe
I
a
guess the grades won't.
cul-de-sac or, I mean, I'm just thinking that's kind of odd for people to have a backyard that abuts a narrow alley is what it would be.
Yeah, what's the grade differential from here to there? Is there a way of
It's
determining that?
not that significant. We have topography here.
Well,
But I
we-
guess it would be useful to have a road there and build your houses facing, so you would pull into your driveway from the east, headed, your house would be back to the west.
Grade lines are.
About 8 feet. Oh, they're 2-foot contours? So about 16. Okay.
So
It's
those
steeper
are
than I
being
thought.
built.
2, 4, 6, 8, probably 10 feet of drop right there.
So you wouldn't put a road there.
So, yeah, I wouldn't be able to put a road there.
This probably predates you, Mike, but are you aware of any setback requirement that we have for this project in that pipe? So we won't be, as I understand it, able to allow people probably to fence that. So it looks like that's something we need to investigate as staff, just to see how those backyards are treated. I don't think we've issued building permits there yet, but I could be wrong. Some of you guys might know. Do you remember seeing anything under construction there? Okay.
But irrigation companies, do they allow you to put the trees in there? A lot of that work with, once they have an easement, they restrict trees.
That's a good point. That's another thing we need to work out. We would require it just per our ordinance, like I said, where you have that change of use between projects. It's a good point.
Can I ask one more question about that? Can you pull back up the other picture, that one? So when we looked at the St. George, I don't know if you want to pull that one up too. If you just want to pull up all these. Along the roadside, I mean, I know that's the roadside probably, but the other, yeah. I mean, one thing that's significant about that is that you don't see the garages. The garages are down the sides. And so, now I'll go back to the other one. This. So I mean, I didn't really like the idea of using the storage units as first as the wall, but now, considering that you don't have to see those garages, it provides more privacy for the people who are using the storage and privacy for the people who live in the surrounding areas, that they don't have to look at people opening their storage units, that it's all kind of private. And even along the north side of that, with the 8-foot wall, that's still very private. But this back side, that's all gonna be, those garages would be open to the people who look out their back window. I don't know what that grade is. I don't know if that's far enough down that you wouldn't notice it. But it would, I don't, if there was some way to make it so people didn't have to look in those garages as well. Do you know what I'm saying?
What if, so what if you were,
8-foot fence, though, I'm not sure, but upstairs windows couldn't just look right in there.
well, I don't know that there's gonna be upstairs. You better come forward, sir.
Yeah.
I get in trouble, so if I do, you better get.
I just bring up privacy concerns for everybody, not just the people who live there, but the people
I
who.
could be completely wrong, but I think the engineer, before he left, said that that's an 11-foot 2, that grade off this back. If that's the case, and it's an 8-foot wall, you'd have to build a 4-story home to look into anything.
You're talking about from down.
If I'm right on the 11.3.
Because I feel like the other three
Well, I
are
mean, I think what we saw here is there was, 10 feet of grade differential just in that small area.
Yeah,
plus then an
So,
8-foot.
plus
and then an 8-foot wall.
yeah. Is it an 8-foot wall or a 6-foot masonry fence?
The city council has to approve anything taller than a 6-foot wall. And frankly, I think if the planning commission imposed that as a condition, subject to the city council making that approval, you could count on them allowing an 8-foot wall.
Personally, I don't see a need for a bigger than a 6-foot wall along that side
I agree.
because of the grade differential. Here, I could,
This looking from down below, you can see how much the grade rises.
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I think the north side, I could see justifying that maybe because of a future potential use.
If we like this, because of those things mentioned, could be considered to do the same thing on the rest of the perimeter? Would you gain anything?
I guess for me, I would suggest, that if we require a 10-foot landscape buffer, but we can't put it there because of the easement, that we shift it over.
Or all we can do is landscaping, maybe not the wall, right? We can't put a wall there, but.
Can you put the wall on the edge? I mean, the way they've got it shown now, it would be outside of the easement.
Provided it's just a 10-foot easement, which I'm guessing it's probably just a 20-foot easement, so.
Just
If the pipe's on the property line, we guess it'd be.
10 feet on either side of the property line is what you're thinking. So, I guess. It's a question I guess I still have there. Anyway, I'll continue on my list if that's okay with you guys. I think we ought to limit signage along Del Monte Road and specifically prohibit any lighted signage along Del Monte Road so that it doesn't shine into the neighborhood. I agree with that the architecture sucks for this location. Sorry, don't mean to be harsh, but it just felt like that needed to be said. And it should be more in line with the neighborhood design. I would not allow corrugated metal panels. It just doesn't fit in the neighborhood. I'd like to see, right now you've got the smaller trees along Arrowhead Trail. I'd like to see another row of larger trees to help screen it, kind of like what you show on the cross section. Again, you show larger trees here and smaller trees on the inside. I'd like to just flip that because of the power line issue to try and help screen that. I like the idea of a turnaround for the trailer. I would restrict any outdoor storage. If you go back to the St. George, again, this kind of depends upon what we decide to do for setback requirements, but I think having a varied fence design like that is better than a single solid wall for two reasons. One, I think it's more attractive. And while, yes, you can see in here, yeah, I know it's boring. You're all good. We get but it also, I think it helps with security. Neighbors take care of what's around them, neighborhood watch type idea. And so I think that helps kind of self-police that. And then the dumpster, I think I would require that. I don't know about I got limit access times as a question mark. Kind of going to what you were saying, Tracy. Could you go back to the site plan, Mike? I'm not sure I'm a big fan of that either, but if you compare it with what we were looking at St. George, if you were to orient this with the short side of the building along here, it helps to create a similar rhythm to the residential neighborhood. And then by having that fence, driveway, and then that rhythm, I think that would help kind of relate better to the neighborhood. And so for that reason, I would like to see a 50-foot setback with a minimum of 25 feet of landscape. So that's my list. Anything you guys look at and go, no, I don't agree with that, and I'm okay with that.
So my only question, back to the dumpster, I've looked on Google at multiple storage units within the city. I didn't see any that had a dumpster location. So I'd be curious to know if a dumpster were required. You mentioned it would be locked up, meaning what good would it do to have a dumpster then if it's locked up? If it's not locked up, I think it's gonna get overused, like was mentioned, and that, in my opinion, is more of a hassle, more of a nuisance with smells and everything else. People aren't gonna stop using the dumpster just because it's full. They're gonna start piling stuff in front of it.
That's true.
So in my opinion,
You've been to my office.
my opinion, I don't think a dumpster should be required for this site.
I agree with that.
And I don't have any problem with that, so.
So you, going back to.
Come on up, Ken, if you would come up to the microphone, please.
I was just trying to get straight what you were saying.
You're back.
And what your recommendations were. So you were saying, if you go back to your comment on the 50-foot setback, go back to the 50-foot site plan. And I'm on board with all that. I don't care with I agree with the architect, he can redo the office plan for sure. Get rid of the corrugated.
So there's the 50-foot setback.
So on the 50-foot setback, the way it's drawn there, this right here, where's that other pointer? That doesn't matter.
Let's throw that one in the garbage.
Sorry, man. No, sorry, Dave, still, that's a nice one.
On and off. He stole it.
That's a nice one. So if you went with the 50-foot setback, this would be a drive aisle around here, so there'd be doors here. These are all storage unit doors here, okay, to get in, to make that aisle work, and then you'd have 25 feet of landscaping here, obviously.
Right.
So that's why this, to me, this one architecturally is not as nice, because that Swiss bank storage doesn't make any sense.
But what I would suggest though is that the orientation of this be rotated 90 degrees. And again, I don't know what that does to you in terms
Well,
of.
it messes up all the storm drain. It totally changes the whole thing.
Well, I know it can be done. I don't know.
I don't know.
Anyway, because I think if you had this smaller face running here, so you had building, break, building, break, building, it's not
Like
as.
have the ends of the buildings come clear up to here, so people can see down into the storage unit doors this way.
That's the one negative, and I agree with that. That's the one
I mean,
negative.
the other setback, the advantage of that is it makes it so you don't see any storage unit doors anywhere.
Yeah.
And everything's totally, it's what we call a fortress style. So the fortress style allows we call it fortress because you just can't see into the facility.
Right.
Now architecturally, if the architectural is the concern and you don't like the straight walls on the storage units, those can be modified too.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you were to put the building on the property, on the setback, we'd want to have some greater offsets, some vertical changes,
Yeah.
some maybe.
Almost like that fence. Really, you
No.
could
Yeah.
make some facades
Very
that
Yes.
come up.
And that's what I'm saying, is that's a lot better, because from a drainage standpoint and the way the site lays, if you go back to let's go back to that other site plan, sorry. Yeah, you go back to this site plan, because all the stormwater is draining this way, and it goes into the storm drain system here and here. So this engineering-wise works the best. But Fortress, this way, you're gonna shield all the storage unit doors. There's no storage unit doors here, so everything's being shielded from the public. You won't see any of these doors at all.
I think if we went this direction, I'd want to see some greater variation in that facade.
I agree with you, though. So I think the office should be redesigned to get rid of all the corrugated metal panel. And then if you go back to your elevations, you're saying seeing some variation.
Right now, that long wall is just pretty monotonous.
I agree with you.
So,
So I'm saying, so if you went to the other setback this way, we would just add some variations in the long wall,
right,
up and down.
right. And you could do the same thing with
Just a facade.
you could do the same thing with the building if it were up at the 35-foot setback.
I don't think the owners would have a problem with that. I think they'd rather do that with the building than try to go to a bigger setback where you'd see more doors and have the building go up and down like this more in the storage unit building, so it's more attractive that way, is what you're saying.
Yep. Yeah, I think you need vertical and horizontal offset.
Yeah, the horizontal offset
That's me.
does do, yeah, the horizontal offset, there is some horizontal offset, but they could do more if you needed them to. Like 8 inches to.
Yeah. You go 8 or 16 or 24, something block module. Sorry, that's the practical architect in me.
Yeah, exactly.
Any other thoughts? Nothing that drives me crazier than to see a block building that doesn't dimension a block module.
So then if you're saying to use the other, Plan A, then you are good with the 35 setback?
I mean, you get more landscaping that way,
Right.
right? 10 feet or more landscaping.
So 35 feet of landscaping with variations in the walls.
And what we just do is variations in these walls here, like this a little bit, in and out, and up and down a little bit.
Correct.
Yes,
And then redo the office.
Yep.
yes.
And that's something we've done in other facilities too.
If you look at that St. George again, if you don't mind.
St. George.
See how they've come up here, if you did
Yeah.
something like that on the building,
Yeah,
It would
along
be
with the
exactly-
horizontals, you'd have some nice designs to it.
yeah, we've done some where we just come up, we pop the block out, because right now the block's gonna pop out from 8-inch to 10-inch block, but we pop them out and pop it out. We've done that like on Think Storage in South Jordan, looks really nice, and some other ones too, so.
I think from the public comment that we got, I thought it was very astute that the office, you mentioned that it was designed to fit in with the ALA building and some of the commercial buildings along there, and I think the concerns that we've heard here is that this is not, doesn't fit in with a residential neighborhood. And so if you could make that office look more residential, that would fit into the neighborhood more. Of course, this building's never going to look like that, but at least the office could have some type of a component to it that would make it more acceptable to the neighbors there, make it look something,
I'm sure you've done something that looks more
Oh, yeah.
residential.
No, we've done a lot of
That's an
storages.
easy one.
They all vary.
Yeah.
So we would, yeah, Bear River Storage there in Provo on about 1930 West, 820 North is an office residence, and it's all single.
Better come to the microphone.
Very nice. So the Bear River Storage in Provo is very nice, office residence.
So any other comments or adjustments to kind of those things that we've talked about?
No, just going back to earlier comments of,
Yes, that's Bear River Storage right there.
Yeah.
That's the office residence, all single level. And then the storage unit there pops up and down
Yeah.
and has some things like
And
that.
I don't mind the double 2-level, because I
Right.
mean, there's got to be 2-level homes in your neighborhood. And
Right.
so it's just a matter of making it fit from the scale.
Yep.
Is there a reason for the 11-foot floor to floor?
No, just to get the mechanical and electrical, they just like about a 9-foot acoustical ceiling in the office and then just room for the duct and electrical.
I can see that on the first floor, but the residence is up on the second
can be-
floor.
it can be
So
8
it can
foot,
be an
9
8-foot,
foot, yeah.
9-foot, yeah, okay.
You're right, Bruce, yep.
Hey, Dave, before you sneak out, are we planning on meeting again as a commission within a couple of weeks?
Just kind of talking about that with them. I meant to bring that up with you guys earlier tonight. And it's just because of Voss's plans to repurpose the Fresh Market building for their needs and that use. We'd like to hold a public hearing sometime in the next 3 weeks to give you an opportunity to consider the development enhancement overlay, kind of that mechanism that we adopted for Griffles here a year or so ago for Vasa. So either on the 16th or maybe the week after, but for me, the 16th is the best night. We have time to advertise for a public hearing for Vasa that night. So maybe to start with that, if you're available for what might be a quick meeting that night, just to review that item.
Squeeze blood from a turnip from me. Is that what
I know, but
That's the case, then I'd make a motion that we table any recommendations for this, what is this, zone change? Or conditional
Right out
use
storage,
permit?
conditional use permit. Yep.
Make a motion that we table this conditional use permit till our next meeting.
are you comfortable having those two items on that agenda then for the 16th and for us to go forward and schedule that? What time
Can I-
of day is
one
best?
clarification, if we can get more information just on that west property line and the easement and what's allowed and what's not allowed for us, so we have a better educated.
I would check with the Canal Company on that, Southfield Canal.
Is there a chance that, I mean, is there time for them to make some of these architectural?
That's what I was just kind of conferring with them about. In my view, and the kid knows better than, it's 2 weeks. So literally 2 weeks from tonight.
Yeah, no, the main thing is the office elevation, the perimeter wall elevations. Those are the two main things,
A
right?
few tweaks to the landscape plan, which should be pretty quick.
And architecture that matches the neighborhood.
That in my mind is probably what's going to take the most time.
And maybe what we can do is, if it's appropriate, I can write up kind of what I've kind of outlined and then distribute it. Can I distribute it amongst the planning commission for
By
them
all
to
means, yeah.
give feedback on and say, you're out of your mind? Which I've not, I've been told that before. And then that can give them some clear.
Got it. I think you've already expressed all your thoughts tonight, though, right? I mean, so everything's out for consideration. I've taken, I think, some pretty detailed notes as well. So I don't anticipate there necessarily being any surprises for anybody after tonight.
Will this necessitate another notice that will go out to the neighbors?
I'll be
I would
talking to the
imagine.
city attorney in the morning, but I think we probably,
I would just
think
do
so.
it just in case.
yeah.
So,
It would be nice to not, potentially drag people out unduly for another public hearing, but that's what we'd be doing is advertising hearing.
so I have a motion from Commissioner Euler to table this until our proposed May 16th. Do I have a second for that?
I second it.
Okay, thank you, John. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
What about the public hearing? Does that need to be determined if it is going to be public or not?
I've understood that you'd like us to do that, and we'll do that.
Okay.
That way, the other thing is if there's anybody else that couldn't make it tonight,
Yeah, true.
Does that satisfy your concern about the public hearing?
As long as I get a notice 10 days prior to this public hearing.
We just stated that. Does that satisfy your concern?
It does, but what I'm saying is,
Okay.
until I receive that notice, if it's like the last one, I get it 8 days prior, then I'll bring the same issue up again.
Yeah.
So I would
Which is
think
fine.
that you've got plenty of time to get that notice out tomorrow, so that I have it prior to 8 days.
all right, so can we jump to item 5A then, the one that you wanted to jump to? Can we jump to that one now?
Take this from you guys. Do you want to keep this, or can I
Nope.
take it for now?
I've got enough of those in my office. Thanks.
You don't get to keep it?
Yeah, you want to keep it?
Yeah, well.
Subject property here is zoned rural residential, and the applicant would like to build one home now on the subject property. There is an existing home there, so in order to build a second one, we have to subdivide.
That's what I didn't catch. I kept thinking, why are we needing to do this if they just want to build one home on it?
There's,
So, thank
there's
you.
one there already. Therefore, we need to change the zoning to allow for basically the development of a 1 acre lot to the south of the existing home. At least that's what I understand the applicant would like to do. And with it being R130 zoning, the development potential that allows, again, it's basically 1 acre lots or a little bit less than that. But because that's such a low density kind of a proposal, we don't have any concerns with recommending that be approved now, basically with the understanding that in all likelihood before the property develops in any kind of significant way, there'd be another request for a zone change. Not to say that that'd be mandatory. Somebody conceivably could do all 30,000 square foot lots on the property, but for that, they'd have to go through a full-blown zone change process, or sorry, preliminary plat approval process, which would come back to you. By just developing one lot there, they may be able to do a minor subdivision. I don't know that we've entirely concluded how to handle that yet. We might not, though, because of infrastructure that's required and just what we require as part of that process. So you may see this again for subdivision approval very soon as well.
Where is this lot located in relation to your? Just south of your house? Okay.
You guys all know where this is, right? Kind of Leland. Sorry, I didn't
Basically.
provide any.
Not far from the storage unit.
What is the general plan designation for it? I forget.
This is, I think this
You may have
actually
said that, but I just didn't.
Didn't. So this is west of the estate.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Yes. That's kind of what
But
I was
not by
thinking.
much.
West and north.
So this is kind of more the medium density
Yeah.
kind of anticipation
But
someday.
as you've indicated, to get that, they'd have to come back in for a zone change. So it's not like we're asking for more than what we've general planned for and got to come back. So.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions for staff? Otherwise-
Are city services available there? Water, sewer, power?
Yep. Why don't we invite you to come up and kind of give us a lowdown. Tell us your name, please, sir.
Bodie Smith. We've already went over, or I've been in and talked about water and power and what was required and what I needed to do on that part of it, so.
Okay, great.
Very good. Thanks,
This,
Bodie.
yep, I'd entertain a motion to move into public hearing.
So moved.
Motion from Commissioner Tagg. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor say aye.
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 Anybody from the community that would like to address the commission on this item? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion to move out of public hearing.
Motion to move out.
I got a motion. Do I get a second?
Second.
Thank you very much. Any questions, comments? Otherwise, I'd entertain a motion.
I would mention that we approve the Larson Smith zone change.
Okay, got a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you. Good. All right. Can I ask you, which item are you guys here for?
I think the duplex. Would be the last one.
Well, we actually have 3 more to go, but
Would
where do you
like to
live?
stay?
Okay, so let's move to item 5B then, and then we'll come back to the sprint. Is that all right?
Can we just approve it?
They didn't even explain what they was gonna build there.
What? Ouch.
He sat here all night, now I bet he hasn't got.
Oh, no.
You don't have it?
I did not see this.
I'm sorry.
You said that's all notice.
We did.
You didn't, there wasn't really,
I didn't see anything in our packet.
Let me tell you what I know about the proposal, which is simply that
Particular
the
duplex.
Olsons,
It's in there.
Jennifer and Kevin, as I understand it, own the property that's in your neighborhood.
they're not here.
They're not here tonight, no. So this is where you're gonna wanna absolutely strangle me.
There's a long line.
Well, if you'd
Getting
put in
there?
What they were intending to build,
Is a duplex,
just a duplex.
yes.
Well, why is the city gonna let them do that when they need a road right straight through there to the high school?
We haven't talked about building a road through there.
Well, why don't you?
Okay?
Sell them all, why don't you build a road right straight through there so that you can cut the traffic down on 200 west?
I've never had anybody suggest that before. I don't know if,
Well, if you did suggest it, they wouldn't do it anyway.
I'll tell you what, because it's come up tonight, I'll bring that up.
They need another road street, second north,
Okay.
on down through to the high school. Then they're gonna build a new high school down there.
They keep talking about.
Yeah, probably on-site is what we think they're gonna do, is rebuild Spanish Fork High School somehow at that location. Ma'am, I will bring that up with city engineer, Mr. Clark works in the engineering department. We'll talk about that,
A street there.
okay? Truly, this is the first time anybody's ever brought that up. We'll discuss that. And I certainly can't make any promises, but we certainly will talk about it.
Third West, they did, who's over the, getting the building permits, they should have finished Third West off to First South, because we get so much traffic. Can't imagine the traffic they get on high school.
Got it, straight there, where we don't have a road.
Yeah, they give them a permit to build a big apartment house. There should have been a road right through there.
It is interesting to me that those are the only two places where we don't follow the grid over there.
Interesting.
Well, you'll probably let somebody build there, and that would, there'll never be another road.
I think we should get her on the planning commission.
At least get her a mic so that people at home can hear her grilling Dave.
It's right, it's outlined in red, right there. Okay, to the north?
North or south?
To the south, okay. So, in short, the Olsons have been working on plans for their project. They initially thought about just building a duplex there. We've talked about maybe doing 3 units instead of 2. And
Sure they're gonna face the east or west?
I don't, initially, it would face the south. The
Face south.
the units would. We've talked about doing a couple of different designs, and I don't know what they're working on right now with their with their architect. We noticed it for the hearing tonight, expecting them to have plans revised and to be ready to present, and they simply aren't ready for the hearing. So I apologize that we didn't mention that at the beginning. That was, I will say this, if you'd like, I'll meet with you anytime you want to go over their plans as soon as I get them. So, if you maybe just give me your phone number before you leave tonight, we'll get in touch with you to have that discussion. I do appreciate what the Olsons are doing. I think they're working hard to come up with a design that's gonna look good and that's gonna fit in the neighborhood. And that certainly is part of the
vacant?
project as well.
Is it vacant now? I haven't driven by it.
It
so-
is,
okay.
yeah. But again, I apologize for not bringing that up at the start of the meeting.
And I've got another suggestion, we just have that notices out, why don't you tell it it's gonna be a duplex or a fourplex? This is true of the meeting.
Good point.
Well, you got an education in civic government, right?
I think we could arrange to get you a merit badge for citizenship in the community.
There you go.
I've lived in this town too long.
Like I said, please let me get your contact information and I'll be in touch. On the Olson duplex and the Title 15 amendments, we are asking you to continue those 2 items tonight. I need to talk about the Sprint,
Right there.
Sprint proposal for just a moment. And we need to hold a public hearing for that as a conditional use. But if you don't mind me taking a few seconds with these gals.
Yep. I'm just gonna go.
I'll do that.
Make a motion, we make a quick 2-minute recess.
2-minute recess.
All right, so we've got 2 items that we would like to continue, right? So I would entertain a motion regarding the Olson duplex to continue that to a future meeting, I'm gonna say.
I'll make that motion to continue the Olson duplex, public, or, what was that? Proposed change?
Zone change.
Yep.
Zone change
I'll
to,
second.
to a future
Oh,
meeting.
sorry, I'll second.
Okay, we got a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Same with the Title 15 amendments.
I'll make that motion that we Continue the Title 15 amendment to a future date.
Okay, got a motion, I've got a second.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Last item, Sprint modification.
Thank you. This fits in the category of routine for me, with one exception. We've reviewed other projects in the past that have involved Sprint, AT&T, different companies like that, swapping out existing equipment on existing cell phone towers. That's what's proposed here with Sprint's proposal tonight for their facility.
Where's this located?
1150 East Canyon Road.
Okay.
You can picture that.
Yep, right next
and
to
north side
right
of
near
the
my
road.
house. Right near the power
near
station or the power
new
plant.
substation. Now, the only thing unique with this proposal, we've reconstructed a substation here. And with that, access to the cell tower site is going to change. So we are building a driveway to get to this site from 600 South here. It's going to run something like that. The only purpose of the driveway is going to be to access that site.
Isn't that a retention pond area?
It does slope a little
dog
bit, but
park.
not much, right?
Dog park.
We've used it in the past as a dog park. It's relatively flat, and I don't
Yeah.
remember there being,
I thought it was a little
I
recessed
think it
there.
is though too, yeah.
There's a retention.
I just wondered if
Further
the
south.
intention was it.
Further south on Canyon Road, or not Canyon, 11th East, there's a retention.
Yeah, and this one is
Patriots Park.
recessed a little bit, and I just wondered if that was the use of that. That's why I asked.
Yeah.
It
Good
must
question.
not be.
It's a good question, John.
It's an odd remnant parcel to have there if it's not something like that, right?
Right.
It's marked as extension basin.
Okay.
I think,
Yeah, it's infrastructure to it, so.
I think it is.
So you'll need a bridge.
Well, actually,
Suspension bridge.
the driveway is designed, and I think the project's out to bid for construction.
Yeah.
As we reviewed this in the DRC meeting here last week, we felt like it was appropriate, I guess it was the week before last, we felt like it was appropriate to, as a condition of approval, require Sprint to pay for that driveway. I'm talking a few $1,000s. And the DRC, in fact, made that a condition of approval, that Sprint be required to, if you could say it one way, to reimburse the city for the cost of constructing that driveway, because it just provides access to the Sprint site. So DRC did that a couple of weeks ago. We talked with the applicant about it, and the applicant sent us a copy of the lease that we think says, hey, by the way, and I should mention, maybe the city owns this site, and we lease it to a company that then has leases with different service providers. There we have it. And in short, we're not sure that we can require them to pay for that per our lease. So my only recommendation tonight is that you approve the proposed conditional use so they can update their equipment. It becomes a little bit larger than it was before, but it won't be noticeably larger. Subject to the applicant reimbursing the city for the cost of the driveway that will provide access to the site, unless our lease doesn't allow that. That's, you could word it a lot of different ways, but unless the lease doesn't allow that, we think covers us either way. So we can continue to research that
So
with
can I
our
ask-
finance and legal folks. And
So there's an access road into the new communication, or not communication, but into the new substation. And it appears to extend out here. Is there a reason there can't be, is there equipment there? Is that why the situation, or can it come just off of there instead of having to go all the way through the park?
We'd have to ask Kelly. I don't know. I wasn't in the design of this.
I'm sure it has to do with the safety of going through that.
Security.
But there's so the fence goes here,
this is outside.
right? So if we had them come here, I just don't like the idea of seeing that penetrate this existing detention dog park.
I know there
I
is
think
a-
this whole corner is part of that substation though, isn't it? Or is that the only fence now that you're talking about?
That line is the masonry fence that encloses it now.
Yeah, so this is the substation here.
And then my understanding is that that's gonna be landscaped,
And these are underground
right? That's storm tech
storm
chambers.
drains.
That,
Thanks.
yeah.
So this will all be landscaped out here, and this will be the substation. In fact, I think the wall's being installed now, or has been recently
I think they're
installed.
being
done.
installed.
There is a gas line that, as I understood it, Mike, you maybe know better than I do, that runs through here. And that's one reason that
To not do,
we talked about needing to
The right of way.
relocate the
That makes
access
sense.
was to avoid that. But obviously, we show still this driveway going over that, so.
right?
So is that driveway going out
Or
to the
can it
west,
come this way?
Dave?
This driveway is proposed to make that loop. Yeah.
I just prefer if we can, not to have to bisect that.
Completely, right?
Yeah.
And again, I think we'd prefer to not spend the money.
Provide a gate right there.
I mean, even if it came off of here and wrapped around,
Yeah.
you know, again, crossed over that gas line there, but stayed off of it for the primary purpose of it.
I wouldn't be surprised if it's a matter of our power guys simply not wanting somebody in their compound.
But it's outside the compound. The compound starts here, doesn't it?
If you did it the way you just described it, yeah.
Yeah.
Doing a gate maybe here someplace.
No,
else.
I would totally get that. I wouldn't want to be in the compound, so I think if we can direct them to go that direction and not impact that park, I would prefer that.
That alleviates one extra driveway, right? Because
Right.
it's already there.
Yeah, no curb cut required. Like that.
Call Kelly.
He's gonna have an excuse, but we don't know what it is.
So this is, you say it's bigger in terms of just diameter?
I can't remember if it's length or diameter.
Okay,
On
but,
this.
but the height of the,
The tower,
That's why they're doing it.
which we removed the trees
Okay.
for the wall, so
So
that,
the biggest,
that's part of the reason we.
concern that they have was, the biggest concern they have was moving trees.
So when they asked me whether we needed to go through the conditional use permit process for this or not, and they said, in particular, they were wondering about trees that were here and here inside the compound. Said, hey, if you want to take out trees, we're going to talk to the planning commission about it. So it was certainly a part of the reason, like Kim said, that it's on your agenda tonight for conditional use
Were
approval.
they required to build those trees or put those trees in when they built the?
I think the trees predated what they
Okay.
built there. I don't know that for sure, but it's,
it seems like there's a row of trees that runs
there
that
it is.
whole length there.
It's
He's
on an
lined
old
up.
ditch line.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Get a picture here in a matter of seconds.
Have the technology.
Yeah, and I,
You know, it's like day, so I should.
clickety click.
So those two farthest west trees are firewood now.
And that's the existing
That-
tower.
Is there enough space because of that power pole?
I think that,
Or can they-
those
can they
power
come
poles
out
have been
there?
relocated.
Okay.
Is that
You can
John?
certainly find a place for two replacement trees.
Well, I'm not,
They
I'm just
really
talking about the
cleaned
path.
that up. It looks
Oh, I
nice
see.
up there now.
Is Sprint the only one that uses that?
No, I don't know who all uses it, but
You make Verizon put something on there, because,
they told us they fixed their problem. Today we met with them.
yeah,
Nothing? Today? You haven't noticed a change today?
I'll have to double check, I don't know. All right,
Should we,
this is a public hearing, so I'd entertain a motion to go into public hearing.
I make a motion to go into public hearing.
I'm gonna go out there and complain.
Okay, I got a motion to move into public hearing, do I have a second?
Second.
Second, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone?
I make a motion to go out of public hearing.
Thank you, John. I got a motion and a second. All right, Mr. Tanner, you have a comment or question?
I just gonna say, can we table this? Should we table it until we do some more due diligence on if an extra driveway is even needed?
The only reason I would say no is that I think it's gonna be really cut and dry. In fact, based on what I know right now, I don't think there's any way we can require that they pay for it.
Well, I mean, about even having this other driveway.
I think there's a very strong likelihood that that's gonna happen, whether it's tied to this conditional use or not, for a few different reasons. So we certainly,
So
we'll talk
that
to,
driveway probably has nothing to do with this conditional use.
that's a good
No.
way to put it. I think at this point, and I get the logic that we were operating with a couple of weeks ago when we,
Maybe we ought to just make the recommendation and not even address the driveway and let you guys deal with the driveway.
They do have to have access.
I mean, the recommendation.
The access has to
actually
be
doesn't say
provided
anything
because
about the
you're,
driveway, so.
I didn't mention anything.
you're
about that,
receiving a
Have to point it
rent
out.
knowing we're still.
or lease.
What? Excuse me? Okay.
Yeah, this is conditional use.
Remember how those work?
Yeah, I do. Where's everybody?
All right.
I'll bring this up with Kelly and bring it and ask
Okay.
for.
I think it's
They
just a,
talked about that's what they
I'd love it if you'd require that the trees be replaced, just because I love going to Kelly and saying, we need trees next to your facility.
I mean, so
Just to watch that shade of red get bright.
why do you think in Provo City, the forester is within the power department? Yep. That's right. So, our idea would be to we could do motion to approve it with the condition of a reconsideration. I mean, that really has nothing to do with Sprint, the driveway location, does it? Or do
I
we
think it's
just-
a mistake to look at it like it does. I do.
Okay. But can we ask staff to reconsider the routing of the driveway to avoid the dog park? Is that the right way to do
Like
it?
I've already heard you do that.
Okay.
So
So all we have to do is deal with then is the conditional use permit.
I think that's best. And for whatever it's worth, I didn't realize how much we received in revenue for sites like this. And based on what I now know about that, if we need to pay for the driveway,
It's worth it.
it's a cost of doing business, and
Yeah.
we're still coming out way ahead.
Okay.
so.
Anybody want to make a motion regarding?
I would make a motion that we approve the conditional use permit.
I'll second.
Okay, we got a
Sprint.
got a motion and a second for the Sprint 1150 East modification. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? And with that, I make a motion, we adjourn.